News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Josh Howard. This is the show where each week we see what's happening in the world of culture, current affairs and politics.
First we'll say, welcome to the UK. Oh, thank you.
And we're not afraid to use our free speech so that you can use yours.
It's not controversial in the slightest to anyone who hasn't lost their mind.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions. But every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Breaking news, live updates, stories that matter.
From the heart of the GB newsroom to every corner of Britain, with our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
GB News bulletins are there to deliver the latest news that matters to you. Bulletins on GB News,
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think GB News is completely unique in the way that we interact with our viewers.
Our audience aren't afraid to have their say. They want their voices heard now, and they've got a channel where that can happen.
I find more and more as I'm wandering around, people come up to me and they say, we saw you on television. I say, oh yes, on what? On GB News.
Hello, are you the famous Sue? The whole crew is me here now. We came to celebrate.
It's our job to be the eyes and ears of the viewers.
They are part of the GB News family, and I'm pleased to say it's a very large family.
And if people go to the time and trouble of listening and watching, then we've got to do a good job for them.
Well, I'm here right in the epicentre of the protest.
Here we go again.
You just tuned in. Where have you been?
It is raucous here tonight.
That's what makes us the fearless champion of Britain.
Good morning, Britain. Good evening, America. Hello, wherever you are watching around the world on a monumental night in international geopolitics. Tonight on The Late Show Live with me, Will Kingston. Peace in Iran. Donald Trump says a deal with Iran is now complete. Writing on Truth Social, the US president said the deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran is now complete. Congratulations to all. I hereby fully authorise the toll-free opening of the Strait of Hormuz and simultaneously herewith authorise the immediate removal of the United States naval blockade. Ships of the world, start your engines. Let the oil flow. President Donald J. Trump. However, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister said Iran's commitments will take effect from Friday and armed forces will always have their, and I quote, finger on the trigger. President Trump has just posted once again on Truth Social, this great deal will bring peace and security to the whole region. Many presidents have tried to make peace with Iran and all have failed before me. The leaders of the region have, for the first time, found a president who can help them achieve a real peace. With the opening of the strait upon the signing of the deal on Friday, for purposes of mine removal, oil will flow on both ends again for the region and for the world. President Donald J. Trump. Closer to home, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has just released a statement. I warmly welcome today's agreement reached between the United States and Iran. This is a hugely positive, hugely important step forward in ending the war, ensuring regional stability and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. I congratulate President Trump and the mediators from Pakistan, Qatar and elsewhere who have contributed to this breakthrough. We have long urged de-escalation, and this is the progress we had hoped to see. Attention must turn to fully implementing the Memorandum of Understanding to ensure the Strait reopens and remains fully and permanently open, and that the detailed elements of the nuclear agreement are finalised. We stand ready to support the technical talks that will now begin. Our priority is that this becomes a durable and lasting peace, and we will work with international partners to support that. We are clear that toll-free freedom of navigation must now be restored in the Strait of Hormuz to begin easing the severe economic impacts that have been felt for several months on families here in the UK and around the world. We will continue to work with partners to support this, including, if required, through standing up the defensive independent multilateral mission, which the UK and France have taken a leading role in planning up to this point, particularly to offer support on mine clearance in an agreed way. For any peace to endure, it is essential that the commitments made, particularly in relation to Iran's nuclear program, are robust, verifiable and fully implemented. It remains the UK's firm and long-standing position that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. Well, with me now to unpack this is Chief US Correspondent and presenter Ben Leo, who is in Boston. Ben, your thoughts on what we have learnt in the last couple of hours?
Hello, Will. What have we learned? I'm just standing here trying to ask myself and think to myself, what have we learned? What's different between now and prior to February 28th when this conflict started? The big celebration tonight from the likes of the President and JD Vance is that the Strait of Hormuz is open again, toll-free, trouble-free. Well, that was the case before the conflict started, so there's that. Secondly, the negotiations with regards to Iran's nuclear capabilities won't be thrashed out until, over the next 60-odd days. So the finer details of that will be dealt with in the next couple of months. So will Iran eventually agree to never seek a nuclear weapon again? We don't know the answer to that. We'll find out over the next 60 days. And President Trump, in the last few moments, telling the Wall Street Journal that he never cared about regime change. Let me read you that quote. So he said, as far as regime change, I never cared about it. This is the third group we've dealt with, and this is the most rational group yet. The group he talks about is the Iranians, the teams are dealing with, the negotiating teams, the regime in Iran. So, I mean, it's interesting for me to hear President Trump talking about he never cared about regime change. Yes, the nuclear weaponry was a priority, but when you're talking about regime change, President Trump sat down when he launched this conflict with a very snazzy video, sat down in a dark room. I remember it now. He was talking to the Iranian people directly, saying, this is your one chance for regime change. It's down to you, the people, to take to the streets and overthrow your government. He said, you'll get one chance at this. This is a generational opportunity. He later, some months ago, said, look, I understand why the Iranian people haven't done that yet. He said as soon as they leave their front doors, they'll get a bullet between their eyes. There's other posts from Trump during the protests in January and February when, according to the US administration, 42,000 Iranians were slaughtered by the Islamist despot regime. Some of those posts include President Trump, Iran is looking at freedom, perhaps like never before. The USA stands ready to help. Another post said, if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. And again, he said, Iranian patriots on a separate post, keep protesting, take over your institutions, save the names of the killers and abusers, they'll pay a big price. Help is on the way. So President Trump now saying he never cared about regime change. Well, look, I support Trump in a lot of things he's doing, particularly illegal migration, cleaning up his country, law and order. But when it comes to the Iran situation, it has to be said, what's changed? Well, the Strait of Hormuz is open. It was open prior to the conflict on February 28th. They've not yet confirmed with Iran about the guarantee that they will never go for a nuclear weapon. That's going to be decided in the next 60 days. And he now says he never cared about regime change when, quite clearly, he gave some concern about regime change when he started this conflict months ago, Will.
What's changed is a question that will be asked across America and the world in coming days, and indeed as well we will be exploring the response of the Iranian people and the Iranian diaspora globally. I think you're right in saying that there is a deep sense of disappointment amongst many Iranians, including Mani Bashazad, who we spoke to on the late edition earlier. For me, Ben, the most interesting and I think revealing line in the comments that have come from Trump were ships of the world, start your engines, let the oil flow. It's an insight into how potentially the economic pressures that were leading to political pressures in the US may have dictated the speed at which this memorandum of understanding has been agreed to.
Well, it's again no coincidence that this announcement has been made on a Sunday evening, just a few hours before the markets, the futures markets open. Brent crude futures are crashed down to $80 a barrel now, so you suspect the S&P 500, the stock markets, will rally hard tomorrow morning. They'll be in the green for a few days at least, I suspect, until, you know, maybe we'll get a U-turn from the Iranians. And with regards to the economy, look, the Trump administration, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Trump himself, Caroline Leavitt, they've all insisted month after month that President Trump can hang tough when it comes to the economy, to oil prices, to energy prices, and most importantly, the message to the American people when it comes to their gas prices, petrol prices, to the Brits. I mentioned to you a few minutes ago on Alex's show, average gas prices in the US now were over $6 a gallon in recent weeks because of the Iran situation. They were at an average of $3 a gallon before the conflict started. California, something like $6.50, slightly lower in other states. But the Americans have been feeling the pinch at the gas pumps. And although the gas prices are far cheaper than the UK, the equivalent of, I think, $6 a gallon is something like 70 pence a litre in the UK, which you and I would be celebrating. But to the American people, that's far too high. So the administration has always said, we can hang tough, we'll get there soon, this is short-term pain for long-term gain. The midterms are coming up in November. I guess they wanted to get that sorted quickly before the midterms, but I'll just say again, we're not really there yet. Yes, the Trump administration says Iranian's military has been degraded. Trump insisting week after week, whenever he gets the opportunity, saying that the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, they have no air force, so on and so on. But with regards to the nuclear program, still up for discussion. Regime change, not interested. So I don't know. I'm just posing the question out there. Will the Iranian people be happy with this? Are MAGA voters happy with this? Probably they are happy with it because they're fatigued about the Iran situation and just want to see it end. But food for thought, Will.
Yeah, well, Ben, a tone of scepticism which I share, which Alex Armstrong shared earlier. Indeed, I think the panel in London also share. So we will keep a sceptical eye on what we continue to hear throughout the evening. Thanks for joining me on the show. On your show, I suppose I should say. With me now is Dr. Eric Mandel, Director of the Middle East Political and Information Network. Eric, thank you for joining me on what is a significant morning in the United Kingdom and indeed, of course, in America. Ben Leo rhetorically posed the question just then, what's changed? Well, as we now have a memorandum of understanding with the Strait of Hormuz being reopened, again, it was open prior to the conflict, with a lack of certainty around what this means for the nuclear program and for the Iranian proxies in the Middle East. I guess I've got to pose that same question to you now. What's changed?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Vice President Vance in the last hour said, we have solved the problem, the Middle East problem. Quote, we have achieved something great. And I had to pause a little bit. And I think what we need to think about is describing the memorandum of understanding, even using the word a peace agreement, I think reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of what this MOU is, this deal is, and of the revolutionary Islamist regime with which it has been made. There's going to be 4 areas of disagreement between the U.S. and Iran concerning what this agreement says. It's going to be on the nuclear file, the Straits of Hormuz, frozen assets, and on Lebanon. And the big question is going to be who will verify, and will the president have the stomach, the will, to enforce the inevitable Iranian cheating? And the Iranians are betting that the president will not go back to war, especially as it gets closer to the midterm elections. And if that's true, Iran has leverage, despite it being military weaker than any time since at least the Iran-Iraq war. And they've already used that leverage to tie Hezbollah to the Iran agreement, this MOU, and that has really constrained Israel. And Israel, for its part, it's not a party to this, but it fears that there are no ballistic missile restrictions. And that is what Israel feels. If we remember, in December 2025, Bibi Netanyahu went to Mar-a-Lago and was given permission to strike the ballistic missiles, which they were producing 100 to 150 a month, which could have led to an existential threat. If that's not part of this, then that means there's going to be a war sooner than later. The Israelis feel the Chinese are going to sell ballistic missile production machinery to the Iranians. And then it gets to what the Gulf states. The Gulf states are worried. They're worried because that America abandoned them, and they now have to acquiesce to a very powerful and strong Iran, at least in their perception. So we're dealing with a situation now where everybody, and I've been watching and monitoring all the mainstream media, are talking about the word peace, and they're talking about all type of things that are going to happen and inevitably flow. But I am much, much more skeptical for American national security interests.
You mentioned the potential fears from Israel in the wake of this memorandum of understanding. What is the possibility that potentially there is a rift or a split that will open up between the United States and a president who appears to want to get a deal done as quickly as possible for economic and political reasons, and Israel, who I imagine just wants to get the job done?
Well, I've been embedded with troops 10 times over the last 2.5 years on the Lebanese border. And I can tell you that the Israeli civilians of the north who have been targeted by Hezbollah are not happy with this deal. Because if you're not able to control your whole country and prevent it from being attacked, then what kind of country are you? And United States, if Mexico is lobbying missiles into Dallas or El Paso or San Diego, even if it didn't hurt anybody, we would be attacking back. So I think the Israelis are worried that they may feel abandoned, and that if Israel, if whether Iran strikes them or Hezbollah strikes them, they must, for deterrence, respond. And could that, as you say, breach the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu? There is certainly that fear. It's definitely the fear in Israel, and it's related to things that are developing right now in the United States. Israel and the United States are developing a memorandum of understanding, the next phase of a partnership, not a one-way street of research and development. And if Israel has to respond to Hezbollah and the president's angry, will that affect the security arrangement? There's a lot of unknowns here, and the Israelis are fearful.
Dr. Eric Mandel, thank you very much for joining me this morning. There is, of course, breaking news that continues to come through after the announcement of a memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States. We're getting more statements coming through from world leaders. We mentioned Keir Starmer's statement earlier. We have statements from France, Germany and Italy. We'll get to those. But before we do, on the line, I have a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, Shaheen Gabadi. Shaheen, thank you for your time. What are your reflections on what you have seen over the last couple of hours?
Oh, thanks for having me. As Madam Maryam Rajavi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, just put in a statement a few minutes ago, underscored that as a movement that has been striving for peace and freedom, we think any memorandum that puts an end to the war and the suffering of the Iranian people is very much welcomed. One has to keep in mind that the only parties in Iran that were interested in war and are interested in war are the mullahs regime and the remnants of the previous Shah's regime. So I think one has to keep in mind that the Iranian people have been suffering, and as I said, any understanding is very much welcomed because that very much ends their suffering at this stage. But also one has to keep in mind that obtaining nuclear weapons, belligerence, meddling in affairs of countries, particularly in the region, have been a part of the mullahs regime strategy for survival, and they will continue to do so as long as they can. And at the same time, one has to remember that as the founder of this regime, Ruhollah Khomeini, put it very clearly, that they view peace as a poison for this regime. So one has to keep this in mind, that this is the type of the regime we are facing. But at the same time, as I was listening to your reporter from the United States a few minutes ago, the task of overthrowing this regime and to bring about democracy and freedom has always been and always will be the task of the Iranian people and the organized resistance. It has always been incumbent upon us to do this, and that's what we are looking forward to do this. And I can assure you that will take place by the Iranian people and the organized resistance. Yet again, as Madam Rajavi pointed out, any international agreement for peace should include an end to the execution of political prisoners and protesters, because we are witnessing a wave of political executions in Iran for the past 2 months. Almost 40 dissidents have been executed in the past 2 months because the regime has used this cloak of war to do this without much international attention. And that's the message that some 100,000 protesters and 100 dignitaries will put out in a massive protest in Paris, which has been scheduled for weeks, on June 20, that, look, any agreement for peace should include an end to the execution of dissidents and political prisoners in Iran.
Yes, well, strength and love to everyone who is fighting for the end of this evil regime. Shaheen Gabadi, thank you very much for joining me. We're going now to, or I should say, just before we do go to our next guest, we have the leaders of Britain, France, Italy and Germany who have released a joint statement on the peace deal. They say the urgent reopening of the Strait of Hormuz with unconditional and unrestricted freedom of navigation is essential. We are committed to playing our part to achieve this in accordance with our respective constitutional requirements, including through a strictly defensive and independent mission to reassure commercial shipping and conduct mine clearance operations. Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. We stand ready to work with the US, Iran and the IAEA to this end. We are prepared to lift relevant sanctions in response to clear, verifiable steps by Iran on its nuclear program. We also reaffirm our full support to the stability, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon and the importance of a robust ceasefire. Let's go now to the inimitable Bev Turner in the United States. Bev, great for you to join us. Well, I guess great for you to join us on your show. What are your reflections on what you've heard in the last couple of hours?
Hello, Will. I'm struggling a little with the audio with you guys, but let me just turn off GB News on my TV so I can hear you through here, and hopefully you can hear me as well.
One of me is plenty.
There's a lot to digest here. Obviously, this news has only broken in the last couple of hours. I've been looking back at my notes to how we've got here, and I think it's really important to consider what President Trump hopes to achieve when they started this action against Iran on the 28th of February. And Marco Rubio was the person who made most sense, I think, in terms of helping us to understand across the world what their ambition was. And I just remind you, he said right at the beginning, the imminent threat was that we knew that Iran was going to be attacked by Israel. Direct quote. He said, and then they would come after us. And if they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would be in a very bad way. Now, that statement has hung over this conflict for America here, because it's played into this narrative that President Trump doesn't make his own decisions. He does the work of Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, as Ben Leo's just been explaining, Ben is obviously on the road with the World Cup. I'm here in Washington, D.C. We're looking at the picture of the White House there. It is a huge day in Washington, D.C. When I've spoken to you, I'm going to be heading over to a watch party for the UFC, the president's 80th birthday. This could not have come at a better time. I don't think this is coincidental. We are talking about President Trump, the showman, tonight. This is a party for his birthday. Some of the most famous people in this country are going to be there tonight. This massive macho event of this big UFC fighting occasion. He would not have wanted to go on the stage tonight with this peace deal not having been done. This is like his birthday cake and all of his presents wrapped up in one huge triumphant moment. Now, the people who work for him will have wanted to give him this tonight. I genuinely mean that. The people that work around the president, they adore him. Some of them, of course, are literally family members, like Jared Kushner, one of the people who has negotiated this peace deal. They've done this because they really care about this man. And so and I share some of the reservations we've heard tonight, if this does evolve into something which is permanent and lasting, it will be the most unbelievable achievement for this government, because make no mistake, since President Trump came into office, he's wanted his legacy, and his team around him, of course, they've wanted the legacy to be that they secure peace in the Middle East. The Middle East is a very wealthy area. As we all know, there's a lot of oil, there's a lot of billionaires, there's a lot of trillionaires, maybe not one, there's one trillionaire watching this tonight. There's a lot of billionaires who are in that area. President Trump likes to do business with billionaires, and they know that over decades, there has been no agreement able to be carved out with those people in that area. He has gone to them with suggestions of the Gaza Riviera once Israel and the Palestinian Palestinian conflict was sorted out. So once that peace deal was arranged in that area, he's then obviously turned to Iran. He couldn't have a grand regional settlement with the Abraham Accords being extended unless he had Iran on board. Now, if he can, and he's been very clear about this, that once this peace deal is arranged with Iran, the next step is to expand those Abraham Accords, to get Israel and Saudi and Qatar and Pakistan, all of them, to put down their weapons, to work towards not just peace, but crucially, Will, to prosperity. Because he knows that those countries, once they are making money, more money than they're making right now, once they become, if it is ever possible, that they can become tourism locations, that they can trade freely with each other in that area, you know what? That helps all of us. That helps us in the UK as well. We will not have the same stream of illegal migration to the UK if some of those countries in that area become more peaceful. So I'm on the edge of my seat tonight, not just for the UFC, but because this could genuinely be the start of the next period in history. And I think we've got to be optimistic. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I don't think there will be another group of people within that building we're looking at there with the intelligence, the will, and the determination to get this done in our lifetimes. You only have to see the way about which Marco Rubio talks about this Secretary of State, potentially the next president of this country. He has been consistent on how he feels about Iran for the last 15 years. You can go back and look at any of his speeches. He wanted to get this done. They've said repeatedly, they want us all dead. 5 days after this conflict started, Caroline Leavitt stood up in the press briefing room in the White House, and she pointed out the numbers, even at that point, that they'd taken out nearly, I think it was about 49, 50 of the top dictators, if you like, in Iran, 50 of the mullah. They obliterated them. They took out the navy. They took out the army. And actually, I know that Iran has held them to ransom, of course, over the Straits of Hormuz. And of course, this has gone on for more than 100 days. But if you look at actually Operation Fury, the military section of this conflict, it was about 5.5 weeks. And so people will say to President Trump, this has gone on longer than you wanted. The military stage didn't. He always said 6 to 8 weeks, and he was about right on that. Following Operation Epic Fury was, of course, Operation Economic Fury. Now, that has dragged out. That has caused pain to countries across the world, including, of course, not least our own in Great Britain. That has certainly gone on longer. Let's see what happens. If JD Vance goes to Switzerland on Friday, there's a possibility, I'm just seeing, that President Trump might also go there on Friday. Then I think we probably have a deal. It doesn't answer, though, Will, the question about what this might mean for the Iranian people.
And that question we will be discussing as the night progresses. Donald Trump will be ringside at the UFC tonight. As I said earlier, I hope he doesn't storm the octagon and raise the memorandum of understanding over his head. There could be some unwanted historical parallels to be drawn there. You've painted, I think, an optimistic vision of what this deal could mean for the Middle East. Bev, I would just play the role of the cynic for a second. There has never been a deal in the 47-year history of this evil theocratic death cult where they have stuck to their word. What gives you the confidence that this time it may be different?
I caught a little bit of that question, Will. I think you said there's never been a regime there, this death cult, that have stuck to their word. Why would this be any different this time? It is very hard to say. All I would suggest is that Iran has isolated themselves in that region because they were actually attacking traditionally their neighbors in that region. They've been more isolated during the last couple of months than they've ever been at any time before. The common enemy that is what they've basically become for that region. So I think we have to also bear in mind, yes, there is a theocratic regime in power. Yes, they've taken out, as I said, about at least the top 50. Maybe by this point, there's more than that. Maybe the next generation will not be quite as Islamic fundamental as we know that the predecessors were. There's a huge population in Iran that we know are not of that mind. I speak to many of their representatives on the Late Show Live regularly. There's a growing sense of the younger generation wanting a different sort of life. And President Trump has hit them hard. He's hit them harder than any other president before him, in collaboration, of course, with Israel. The tensions will be extremely high between now and Friday. Let's see what happens. But President Trump will go out tonight on his birthday on that stage, and he will treat this as a victory. And it is a victory, regardless of what happens effectively between now and a deal truly being signed. He has done what he set out to do, which is take away the nuclear capability. The White House has said on several occasions that even if they started to develop their nuclear program again from scratch tomorrow morning, unobserved by America, and frankly, that's not going to happen. It would take them 10 years between now and then to get back to where they are today. Certainly some details to be ironed out. But I think we can all sleep, frankly, in the West, easier in our beds, knowing that America has done this to Iran on behalf of the entire Western world, particularly in terms of their nuclear capabilities, of course, and by hitting them in the pocket where it hurts, because hopefully what we now will understand is that their funding of lots of their proxy regimes, Hezbollah, etc., will have been compromised. There is a lot of detail, Will, as you say, but I think as far as we in the West are concerned, we're in a much better place today than we were in the middle of February. How this plays out with his American base, though, is also pretty interesting, because as we know, he stood on a ticket of peace, and he certainly achieved peace in various areas around the world. But the American people, a lot of them, did not want this conflict, and they have used it as a stick to beat President Trump with regularly. You weren't going to cause any more wars. Look what you've done. Particularly, we've said it on the Late Show Live before, the young MAGA base, those men who say that they lent him their vote. They did not like this conflict because they didn't want to think that they might end up getting pulled into, as young men, a conflict on the other side of the world. He might win back some of that votership with the event that's going on down the road tonight, of course, this UFC event. He's very clever how he's playing to different sections of the American public. They want their gas prices down. They want their inflation to come down. And hopefully the timing of that remains to be seen. But if this peace deal is maintained, then those will inevitably come. And if the region can become more stable, this is what the White House has been saying repeatedly, if stability, a genuine grand regional peace settlement is now achieved in the Middle East, that is going to give us all cheaper oil and gas for decades to come. I share some of the cynicism, but I'm also quite excited about this because I think they very much wanted to get this done. So I think we should treat this as a celebration tonight.
Well, a burst of optimism to go alongside the cynicism from Alex Armstrong, Ben Leo and myself. We will be probing that question if that you raised, Bev, but that's a typically insightful big picture analysis. Thank you very much for joining us. That, of course, was the inimitable Bev Turner, who you can see on The Late Show Live throughout the week. So Some more breaking news now. Of course, this story is continuing to evolve as we learn more. President Trump said in his interview since agreeing the deal that the agreement he reached with Iran would ultimately assure that the Strait of Hormuz is permanently toll-free, and argued that despite the objections of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, he had saved Israel from nuclear obliteration. He told the New York Times that if Iran failed to reach a final nuclear accord with the United States, a process his aides say they expect will begin on Friday in Switzerland, he would restart military attacks on Tehran or make the United States the guardian of the Middle East in return for 20% of the region's revenues. I'm going to repeat that because it's an interesting thought. He has said if the Iranians fail to reach a final nuclear accord with the United States, a process his aides say they expect will begin on Friday in Switzerland, he would restart military attacks on Tehran, and he would make the United States the guardian of the Middle East in return for 20% of the region's revenues. Well, joining me on my panel in London this evening, GB News contributor Paul Cox and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth. And in Washington is award-winning former journalist and founder of media advisory experts Mark Albert and political commentator Hilary Fordwich. Thank you one and all. Let's start with America first. Hilary, I'll start with you, and I'll start with that news. In fact, no, we will get to the guardian of the Middle East. I'll let the panel have some time to process that one. But just more generally, Hilary, your reflections on what you've seen in the last couple of hours.
Well, Will, let's get the bad news out of the way. I don't think that signing and agreeing is exactly the same as implementing. There's a lot to still be negotiated, but the fantastic news is, yes, the Strait of Hormuz is going to be open. Everything that Bev said was absolutely correct. I think what is really important is the American public wanted him to be the president of peace. That's what President Trump ran on. I think the timing is absolutely brilliant. It is for his birthday. Yes, this is a big birthday present, as she mentioned, but very importantly, the timing is great in terms of those midterms coming up. Now, there was a lot of talk about the fact that the Iranians knew about the midterms and the Iranians weren't going to agree to things, to which I did agree, because of course they think in terms of, hundreds of years and thousands of years, and we're very short term here in the US. Yep. But very importantly, getting it done now, Will, means that gas prices are going to come down. That's number one. I think that when they've mentioned about the immigrants, that because obviously now with much more peace in the Middle East, with much more tourism, many countries there getting on board with this, that we may not have as many immigrants in the UK. Remember, Muslim countries don't want those Muslims, which is a very interesting aspect. But last but not least, very importantly for the American public, and right now in this timing, all the criticisms of President Trump, remember, he never put boots on the ground. I think that economic fury was really important because the Iranians, albeit they didn't care about their own people, didn't care about killing 42,000 of their own people, they did care, Will, about their assets, and that financial pressure, which we heard a lot about from Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent, that is what I think put the pressure on these leaders. They don't care about their own people, didn't even care about the military aspects, I don't think. They cared about themselves and they cared about their finances. That is what helped get this deal done. If we had not had a president in the White House that was good at deal making from a financial aspect and a financial position, this may never have happened. And this will be peace for many years to come, I believe.
Well, we will see about that, and we'll discuss the likelihood of that happening. If you are just joining us, what you are seeing is a UFC ring and crowd being set up on the White House lawn. There is a UFC bout taking place tonight. I personally have never covered a peace deal immediately followed by a UFC bout in my career. That's because it's never happened before, only in the Trump era. Mark, I'll go to you next. Hilary said that the timing of this deal was great for the president, and that's one way of looking at it. The other is some people will argue because of his desire to get a big moment at this event, his desire perhaps to get it done on his birthday, his desire to ensure that gas prices do go back down in the United States, his desire to make sure that the damage for midterm candidates is smaller, means that he could have rushed this deal and the terms are not as good as what they otherwise would have been. What do you say to this potentially being a rush deal on the president's part?
Well, everything you just listed there, Will, is leverage on the part of the Iranians. Now, did they use it? Did it create any more favorable terms for them than they would have otherwise gotten? I don't know, because we haven't seen the memorandum of understanding. The JCPOA, the Iranian deal, constructed under President Obama was 18 pages. I printed it out right before I came on set here so I could look it over. Right now we have 0 pages of an agreement public from the Trump administration and the Iranian administration. And so I think that a lot of this tentative MOU, I suppose would be the right phrasing that we have tonight, is simply saying it's an invitation to keep talking. We're going to see some benchmarks in 60 days. But as you've already mentioned, things will start to ratchet up starting on Friday if this deal, this MOU, is actually signed. But nothing is in concrete that I've seen reporting on. It's an invitation to continue talking in these 60 days, particularly on the details of the nuclear arrangement. And I don't know if the control room has it, but I'd love to look at the Prime Minister's statement, which I thought was incredibly revealing in 3 separate places and is much more cautious and mellow than the statement from President Trump on Truth Social. For example, the Prime Minister had mentioned that one of the priorities is to ensure that the Strait reopens and remains fully and, quote, permanently open. And that's an acknowledgement that it is not permanently open now as it was before the conflict on the 28th of February. The statement also mentioned that he wants detailed elements of the nuclear agreement finalized, which means, by logic, there are no final arrangements of this nuclear deal yet. And he mentioned we stand ready to support the technical talks that will now begin. This is not a final deal. This is not JCPOA 2.0. This is an agreement to start negotiating for the next 60 days.
Yes, I'm not surprised that the tone of Keir Starmer's statement is very different to Donald Trump's. I think it speaks to the dramatically different personalities between the two men, or perhaps the fact that only one of them has a personality. Benjamin, I'll go to you. What have been your reflections on what you've seen over the last few hours?
Well, pardon me, I admire Bev's enthusiasm and optimism, but I think it might be misplaced. I mean, look at what's happened here. He says recently that he didn't do this for regime change in Iran, a motivation which I very much agreed with. And yet, when he went in with the express purpose of taking out the regime. So it's hard to look at this as anything other than a failure.
I'll pause you there because I will read out what he said on the early hours of February 28. To the great proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. And then later that day, he said to the Washington Post, all I want is freedom for the people. So I don't think perhaps that is an explicit objective of regime change, but the way that I recall he framed it was that the US was going to create the conditions for regime change.
And that was an ambition that I thought was well placed, and certainly many people in the West and in Israel felt it was well placed. Indeed, I think killing the leader of a country looks a lot like attempted regime change to most people. But what we've actually had is a situation in which I fear it has proven Iran's strength rather than its weakness, because their ability to hold much of the world, including its own neighbours as well as the West, over the barrel through the Strait of Hormuz, I think is incredibly dangerous. It's cost the global economy trillions of dollars. And what this memorandum yet to be signed shows is that that will reopen, but that will only return to what we had before the 28th of February. Meanwhile, my question would be, given what we've talked about this being a theocratic regime, is that what is to stop them doing this again if they don't like the terms? It's also, having looked at Reuters to try and get some detail, Tehran has given some indication of what this memorandum includes, and one of the elements, apparently, according to Iran, is that $25 billion of frozen assets from Iran must be unfrozen before the 60-day negotiation starts on dealing with their nuclear question. Now, as a cynic, it has to raise the question that if they're about to get $25 billion back, could they then renege on a deal with that considerable injection of cash? And so I think there's still quite serious questions about what's going to happen in the coming weeks. And I fear that the timing with the 80th birthday of the US president may be convenient and may have been some leverage that Iran had over him on these negotiation timetables.
Paul, the footage that viewers are watching at home is of this UFC fight, which is about to, or series of bouts, which is about to take place on the White House lawn. I think in the era of Donald Trump, we can get a bit desensitised to the surrealness of it all. But again, in the not so distant past, if you were to say that we would be talking about a ceasefire or a peace deal between the Iranian theocratic death cult and the United States of America after a over 100-day conflict, and then we would be showing live pictures of a UFC bout on the White House lawn, it's a very surreal age in which we live.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, isn't it? I don't know if we're built with the processor or the processing ability to fully process exactly what's going on here when you've got President Trump celebrating his 80th birthday with men grappling on the lawn of the White House, and simultaneously we're discussing a peace deal for a conflict which he started. Absolutely fascinating smorgasbord of opinions tonight. In the 41 minutes we've been on this show, I've heard so many different opinions that the forming of my opinion is still fermenting. It was wonderful to hear Bev's optimism. I have no idea how well placed that is or not, but it was good to remind everybody of some of the positives here, that there have been some positive changes since the 28th of February, i.e. the previous Ayatollah has gone, their military capability has been defeated, the proliferation of their nuclear intent has been halted. But on the other hand, you've got Ben Leo, a colleague of all of ours, as you have done and as I have done, as others have done, shown a level of scepticism here, saying, well, what have we really achieved? If I wasn't on this show, I would definitely be watching it tonight, and I would be staying absolutely hooked to this for the next 2 hours, because goodness only knows what other statements are going to come out from Donald Trump. I believe earlier on there was a statement that a piece that he'd said to a journalist this evening, saying that he had saved Israel from nuclear obliteration, which is a fascinating statement, because of course if Iran had been able to generate a nuclear warhead, which is very different to a nuclear capability, then of course that would have been first of all aimed at Israel. I'm not sure that's how Bibi Netanyahu sees this right now. I think he would like this to have gone on a lot longer and a lot harder. And I just want to keep reminding myself of the point I made at the end of the previous show, which is this really is about, irrespective of all the economic impacts this has had and is still having and will still have, there are the people of Iran sat at the epicenter of this, wondering what on earth is going on and how it will pan out for them.
Yeah, and we do need to keep our thoughts with the Iranian people on a day like this, and we will continue to talk about them over the next couple of hours. I want to go now to Justin McLean, US Army veteran who served in Iraq. Justin, thank you very much for joining us on what is a historic evening in the United States. Our show tonight, and indeed the prior show, has had, to Paul's point, a range of opinions which have gone from highly sceptical through to the more optimistic tone that Bev Turner put forward. Where do you sit on that spectrum? How hopeful are you that this memorandum of understanding will lead to a deal, and that deal will lead to a lasting and enduring peace?
Well, it's always great to be back on GB News, and I'm going to lean more towards optimism. I think that we're reaching the end of this conflict, and I pray for everybody involved. In fact, I was preaching this morning. I preach in my church, and I always include, Israel and Iran in our prayers, and we just want what's best for the people of these countries that are involved. But the U.S. and Iran are already walking a tightrope. Israel could be the gust of wind that really brings it all crashing down. We need to go in with an optimism, but cautiously, and allow these talks to continue.
Yes, so you mentioned there, Justin, that's interesting. You were preaching this morning in your church. I want to get a feeling for the human dimension in the United States. When you were having conversations with members of that congregation, perhaps with family members, friends, further afield, what are their thoughts on this conflict? And I guess as an extension of that question, how do you think this news this evening will be received by the American people?
Well, within my congregation, I actually have a fairly young congregation. Most of them are in their mid to late 20s. And we're optimistic. in Eastern Tennessee, I'm in a very conservative area. We support what President Trump is doing, but we're realistic about it. The events that's going on right now kind of is a throwback to Rome with the bread and circuses. I mean, being the 250th anniversary, we want to celebrate this, but we can't forget of all the things that are going on. So we're being realistic about it. We know that lives are being lost. We know that this is a conflict. I've supported President Trump in this up to the point where boots on the ground, and now that we have, U.S. Marines and Navy in the Strait of Hormuz, it needs to come to an end. So I'm going to stay optimistic about it, and most of my congregation is as
Yeah, so I've spoken to other Iraq veterans actually, and one thing which has been consistent amongst those people have been how hawkish they are on getting rid of this awful Iranian regime. They saw the impact that the Iranians had in Iraq, as they have had with other proxy paramilitary forces across the Middle East, the money that they would pump in to kill United States soldiers, the damage that they have done across the Middle East, the way that they have sponsored terrorism. There are a few people I've heard who have been more hawkish around the need to get rid of them. Do you think that some people will be disappointed that for them this is a bit of a halfway option? It isn't going all the way of trying to get rid of this awful regime once and for all. Absolutely. As a combat veteran, so I actually was on the road in Iraq, and most of the guys that we were fighting over there were not Iraqi. They were Iranian. They were even Saudi Arabia. We saw all kinds over there. I would have liked to see maybe a little bit more accomplished over there, but again, we're limited on the information we're going to get. A lot of it is going to be propaganda coming from Iran. They're going to make their position always look better than what it actually is. So we need to just stand behind our government and be vocal about what we want out of this. Being able to write our representatives here, our congressional representatives here, and our senators, and let them know that we have opinions. And if this does not come to an end, I do feel that President Trump is losing support, and that support is diminishing every day. Yes, well, time will tell what the political ramifications are of this in the United States. Justin, thank you very much for your time this evening. Let's go back to my panel now. I'll start, Hillary, with you. And again, we have yet more breaking news. I'm reading from the Telegraph here. Iran has confirmed the deal on their end. The Iran's Supreme National Security Council has issued a statement from Tehran. The wording is, according to the agreements reached, the war and military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, will end immediately and permanently from tonight. And furthermore, the naval blockade against Iran will be immediately and completely lifted. So we were saying earlier this evening, if you may recall with Charlie Peters, that there was some confusion that stemmed from, I believe, the deputy foreign minister from Iran, who said that they wanted to pursue or at least have the potential to pursue hostilities through to the signing on Friday. From what this would seem to suggest, we are now hearing from the Iranian regime that there will be an immediate cessation of hostilities. The statement goes on to say the signing of this memorandum of understanding will officially be carried out on Friday. Negotiations for the final agreement will be postponed until after the other parties fulfills its commitments according to the Memorandum of Understanding. The Islamic Republic of Iran appreciates the efforts of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and the government of Qatar. Hillary, I'll go back to you here. I'll ask the question that I asked of Bev, and that is one that has been on my mind throughout this entire conflict. It's been on many people's minds, and that is when you have an evil, theocratic death cult that has never stuck to its word, that has a reason for being, which is the annihilation of the State of Israel, that hates America and hates what it stands for. I struggle personally to get to a position where I can believe that any sort of deal will be worth the paper that it is written on. But perhaps you can fill me with more optimism.
Well, Will, I think you share the sentiments of many smart people, many people that have observed history, and I think your concerns and your skepticism is very well founded. However, the only thing that religious fanatics that are the Iranians care more about than their religious fanaticism. And you're absolutely right in everything you said. What's the one thing they care about more? They care about themselves. And President Trump is no fool. He has done here, I am certain, I don't know the details of this deal. No one does yet. It hasn't been signed and we haven't been told about all the details. But I can assure you, Will, because President Trump wants to go down in history. He didn't need to just be president to be another president. He wants to go down in history as being the president of peace. He wants to go down in history as being the greatest president ever. He wants to bring peace to a region, not just this one little deal. He wants to bring peace to a region that hasn't seen peace, Will, for thousands of years, for 2,000-3,000 years. So what does this mean? It means he will tie them. He will make sure that there are financial constraints. He will make sure, unlike President Obama, who chucked billions of dollars out of the back of airplanes to them, he will make sure it's all tied up and that there are literally stipulations with every move. Now, my only concern that validates what you're concerned about is the next administration. I hope we don't get somebody in the White House who's going to undo any of this. And, I mean, credit to Keir Starmer, I suppose better late than never, Keir, which is, and all the European leaders are all jumping on the bandwagon now. Let's hope other leaders don't go back on this. But what with the Abraham Accords in place, I think that this deal will be one for longevity and will change the world. We are witnessing world history in the making, Will.
You just mentioned Keir Starmer. His Foreign Secretary has now welcomed the announcement. Yvette Cooper, she said it's important for regional and global security and for the international economy. She said it was vital that freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz was swiftly restored. She added the UK stood ready, along with France and other countries, to support the process if needed. Thank you, Yvette. The question I would ask you, Benjamin, is, and look, I understand that there is a certain diplomatic tone that needs to be struck with these sorts of interventions from other countries. Is there anything that we can take out of what Yvette Cooper has said, what Keir Starmer has said, that goes beyond just the usual diplomatic box-ticking exercises?
Well, I mean, I think what they're saying is that the whole of the West will be behind this deal with the US and Iran to try and ensure that it's followed. And of course, the UK economy is projected to be the worst affected from the fallout of the Strait of Hormuz being closed. So this will be very welcome news for Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, and for all of us who have to pay those bills. And so that is a big positive. But I would also say that among the risks is the fact that the oil price, of course, shoots up quickly. Ben Leo mentioned earlier that it had doubled the price in US in states like California, but it will fall slowly. And so how serious will the economic fallout be in the months to come? I dare say that for people like Keir Starmer and indeed Donald Trump, that will emphasise why they need to get this deal to stay. I think some of the dangers are the fact that there will now be a 60-day period to discuss the nuclear ambitions of Iran and curtailing those. And I fear that after years in which Iran had been proven to be weaker, so ever since the October 7th attacks on Israel, what you had seen is Hamas, Hezbollah, the Assad regime had one by one, each of Iran's proxies had either fallen or been significantly weakened. Iran then had much of its nuclear capability taken out on this week last year. I was in Israel during that war in a bomb shelter as Iran hit back. And then they took out much of the leadership. So until February, they were looking quite weak. I fear that what Iran has learned is that it has this considerable power over the global economy and that it could return to trying to stop the Strait of Hormuz functioning again. And I think that will be a threat that many foreign leaders will be wondering about. And that's why the question of how tight this deal will be is so serious.
Well, let's go to that point from Benjamin, because when I have as well suggested scepticism that they will stick to a deal, the two arguments that I've heard in response are either A, there are conditions that are placed in this deal, to Hillary's point, that means that if the Iranians don't stick to the terms, assets can be refrozen, sanctions can be put back on, they can be damaged economically. And B, and I think last night Matt Terrell called these key performance indicators. And B, there is the threat of restarting the conflict in a kinetic way if the Iranians don't stick to their word. How convinced are you that those two prongs are enough to ensure that Iran actually stick to the terms of this deal long term?
Well, Hillary is very astute here, which is what stops the next administration from doing what the Trump administration 1.0 did to the JCPOA agreement, where it ripped up what Obama and the Iranian regime had agreed to. Now, there is a way to take care of that concern, which is send it to the Senate for approval as a treaty. That takes 2/3 vote. President Obama did not do that with the JCPOA. And then the Senate can put in language if they want to try to do that to make sure that, just like they have with NATO, that the president has to come back to the Senate to withdraw. So that is a way that the president could try and ensure that the next administration does not undo this, which is to go to the Senate. Now, there's a reason President Obama did not go to the Senate. It takes 2/3 of a supermajority to get that done. So would President Trump want to do that? Probably not. But Hillary is absolutely right. That's a concern.
Well, to my panel, thank you for joining me. We will see you in the second hour on what is a historic night for geopolitics in the Middle East, although the extent to which that will endure in the future does remain to be seen. If you are just tuning in, there is a memorandum of understanding for a peace deal between the Iranians and the United States that has been announced. Donald Trump is on his way to the UFC on the White House lawn. I never thought I'd be announcing a peace deal on national television followed by a UFC bout at the White House, but here we are. You're not going to want to miss that footage. It's all coming your way on The Late Show Live, only on GB News.
From court mornings
to warm family brunches,
from football to tennis, in the car,
in the kitchen,
GB News Breakfast is there. With the stories you need and the conversations that matter.
Anyway, let's talk business.
Well, it has been a historic night in British politics.
It's astonishing, isn't it?
We're here again.
To start your day just right. GB News Breakfast.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised. I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Some people enjoy lazy Sunday mornings, but not me.
What's the truth of the matter? So that's a very live question. Would you support him if he waters down these plans?
Before the spin sets in, I'll be getting to the truth.
This is personal.
No soft questions, no easy answers.
It's one thing if the state has rules in this country. It's another thing whether the police and others actually police them.
Setting the agenda and holding those in power to account.
You can't really blame her if the system is set up this way.
You will not want to miss it, trust me. The Camilla Tominey Show, Sundays from 9:30, only on GB News.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight talking show where all voices are heard.
And, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Dawdney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
In fact, has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I ever got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Tom Harwood. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, Britain. Good evening, America. Hello, wherever you're watching around the world on a significant night in the history of the Middle East and the United States of America. But just how momentous that will be for the future of peace in the Middle East does remain to be seen. I'm on the Late Show Live tonight. It's Will Kingston, and we have potentially peace in Iran. Donald Trump says a deal with Iran is now complete. Writing on Truth Social, the US president said, "The deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran is now complete. Congratulations to all. I hereby fully authorise the toll-free opening of the Strait of Hormuz and simultaneously herewith authorise the immediate removal of the United States naval blockade. Ships of the world, start your engines. Let the oil flow." President Donald J. Trump. But Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister said Iran's commitments will take effect from Friday and armed forces will always have their finger on the pulse. I note that their Security Council has come out subsequently and contradicted that message. So there is some confusion on the Iranian side, but the best indicator at the moment is the more recent message that they will end hostilities immediately ahead of a signing in Switzerland on Friday of a peace deal. Let's bring you some more breaking news. President Trump said in his interview since agreeing the deal that the agreement he reached with Iran would ultimately assure that the Strait of Hormuz is permanently toll-free, and argued that despite the objections of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, he had saved Israel from, I quote, nuclear obliteration. He told the New York Times that if Iran failed to reach a final nuclear accord with the United States, a process his aides say they expect will begin on Friday in Switzerland, he would restart military attacks on Tehran or make the United States the guardian of the Middle East in return for 20% of the region's revenues. That's some proposal. With me now is Chief US Correspondent and presenter Ben Leo, who is in Boston. Ben, I want to start with those comments from Donald Trump in that interview with, it was the New York Times, was that interview, and I'll repeat that comment that he made because it's a striking proposal. If the Iranians don't stick to the terms of the deal, he will either restart military attacks or he will make the United States the guardian of the Middle East in return for 20% of the region's revenues. What do you make of it?
Well, the markets have barely had time to price in peace, and now we're already talking about threats to restart the hostilities. So let's be clear what this is. It's a memorandum of understanding, which is basically a deal to work out a deal over the next 60 days, which doesn't include, for now, the nuclear progress of Iran's ambitions to get hold of a nuclear weapon. Of course, that the uranium, the enriched uranium, is still buried deep underground after B-2 bombers obliterated Iran last year. Where that uranium, if Iran ever agrees to give it up over the next 60 days, is stored, that's another topic for conversation. That will be thoroughly discussed over the next 60 days. Will it go to the likes of Russia, which has been mooted? President Trump wants it to go to America. The big question is whether Iran will give it up at all. J.D. Vance, the Vice President, taking to American news networks this evening over the past couple of moments, saying that he is confident that Iran in the next 60 days will be agreeing to give up the enriched uranium in return for, it's being reported, the lifting of around $14 billion worth of Iranian sanctions, assets which are frozen, which the IRGC want to get their hands back on. And also the Fars news agency, which I will say is a state news agency in Iran, so take it with a pinch of salt. They are suggesting as well that this memorandum of understanding includes a $300 billion package to rebuild the country, war reparations, if you like. But that's unconfirmed by the United States, and again, it comes from the Iranian side. So again, could be potentially propaganda, which is worth talking about actually as a point. Iran, the IRGC, will now have to sell this memorandum of understanding, and that's what I'm going to keep calling it, because I think calling it a deal to this point is slightly generous. They're going to have to go to the Iranian people and say that, yeah, we've we've really held President Trump's feet to the fire here. We've got what we wanted. He's had to make concessions. Already one news agency separate from FARS this evening saying that they had last-minute concessions from President Trump with regards to Israel's strikes on Lebanon, which apparently they said they pressed him on and he agreed to at the last minute. Again, it all sounds very much like propaganda, but that's what will happen over the coming days, Will. You'll see lots of public statements, you'll see lots of propaganda and headlines from the Iranians trying to sell this. But the most important point to remember is this is a memorandum of understanding. The details will be thrashed out over the next 60 days for the most important points, and the top point on that is the nuclear ambitions of Iran, which for now nothing has been cemented.
Well, I dare say they've got an easier sales job than the United States because they control the state media and they can turn the internet on and off at will. I think it's the United States has potentially a difficult sales job here, and JD Vance, who you mentioned, is putting a very positive spin on this, and he's putting it in the context of the region more broadly. He said what the president has done has create the real space to transform that region. So they're not just talking about the end to a conflict, they're talking about a broader agenda of change in the region. You have suggested scepticism more generally tonight, Ben. How confident are you that if a memorandum of understanding is to become a deal and a deal is to endure, this could actually lead to that type of change in the Middle East?
Well, I hope nobody's upset by my scepticism. I'm a very positive person on the whole generally, but I just think for now we've heard many times in recent weeks and months, especially on a Sunday evening, hours before the futures market is open, that we've come to some sort of landmark agreement. I would love nothing more than to have peace in the Middle East for the safety of Israel, for most importantly the people, the civilians of Iran, to live their life in a peaceful and harmonious way, away from the despotic rule of their Islamist nutjob leaders. I would love nothing more, but let's not forget there was talk of regime change when this conflict started. I'll say again, President Trump released a snazzy video. He broadcast it to the world on February the 28th or 29th when the conflict started, saying Iranians have a chance now to overthrow their government. They have the first chance in a generation, maybe the last chance ever, for new leadership in Iran, for a peaceful, prosperous and abundant future in Iran prior to the Islamic takeover 47 odd years ago. That's now been forgotten about. I suggest President Trump this evening telling the Wall Street Journal that regime change was never on his mind and he doesn't care about it. So if you're going to keep these kind of people in power under some sort of deal or negotiation for the next couple of decades, I would just say again, these are Islamist despot maniacs. They are murderous people who care not for the West or the United States. Indeed, the United States government says they slaughtered 42,000 of their own civilians. So I just don't, again, apologies for being sceptical, but if you think this is going to bring long-lasting, harmonious peace in the Middle East when you still have Islamists running the country for however long you want to, pick a time frame in the future, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, these people are not the same as us, Will. They are Islamist extremists who believe that if they blow themselves up or they go and kill infidels, they'll enter heaven with Allah and have a bunch of virgins waiting for them. So I think talk of harmonious, heavenly-like peace in the Middle East, whether this memorandum of understanding is manifested into a deal proper or not, is for the birds.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. My final question, because we can perhaps be guilty of tunnel vision, talking about the history of the Middle East, talking about the significance of this in international geopolitics. But at the same time, as I think about it, I was speaking to you last night when you had your arm around Boo's Scottish football fans. There's a World Cup going on in the country. We're currently watching footage of a UFC event on the White House lawn. You've got some of the celebrations leading up to 4th of July taking place. There's a lot of bread and circuses going on. Will this still cut through with the American public?
Well, very pertinent point, Will. It's UFC tonight. It's the big event kicking off in around an hour's time on the South Lawn of the White House, this big mixed martial arts event. It's President Trump's 80th birthday as well. So to say that it's a coincidence that this memorandum of understanding has been announced this evening, just hours before this big event on Trump's birthday, it's not a coincidence. I suspect, as I mentioned to you previously, President Trump will take to the octagon, the cage floor, at some point tonight and make a big announcement about how they've had a massive win. The American people just want to crack on with their lives, get to work, feed their families and enjoy their lives, and that means partially having gas prices come down. So for the time being, Brent crude futures are down to around $80 a barrel. Hopefully in the days and weeks ahead, if this deal, this memorandum sticks, then the gas pumps, prices at the pumps will come down as well, and Americans will maybe soon start forgetting about this whole Iran conflict. But for the most part, I think hold your breath. Let's see what happens between now and Friday. They're signing this memorandum of understanding in Geneva on Friday, and then from then forward they have 60 days to negotiate the finer detail, including, as I keep saying, the #1 priority, the big headline for this conflict, which was the nuclear ambitions of Iran, which, as far as we understand, hasn't yet been discussed.
To quote your words in the previous hour, what's changed? There's the question on so many minds. Ben, thank you very much for your time. We will stay connected with you going into the third hour. I want to go back to my panel now, and I want to start, Benjamin, with the comments, the very intriguing comments that Trump made to the Wall Street Journal. This goes to this question: how can we ensure that this evil regime sticks to a deal if the deal is in fact signed on Friday? And what Trump has said, well, you know what, I've got a couple of thoughts in mind. He says, A, if they don't stick to this deal, we will restart the conflict, or this proposal: the United States will become the guardian of the Middle East in return for 20% of the region's revenues. Benjamin, you're no doubt a big fan of Middle Eastern imperialism. This must be music to your ears.
I mean, it's quite hard to understand what he really means by it, because I'm not sure how he would get 20%. That would surely involve a number of countries obliging, which I can't see that they will. Saudi Arabia, a close ally of the US in recent times, in a very wealthy country, I suspect they wouldn't be interested in such a deal. And then when it comes to the question you first raised about Iran and the fact that this war could be restarted, well, I would note that in the recent months they haven't seemed too at pains to be under such attack, because one of the problems with trying to negotiate with a despotic theocratic regime as the IRGC is in Iran is that they don't have the same measure of success. In fact, survival itself is success as far as the regime is concerned. So the economic damage that the Iranian people have suffered, the tens of thousands of deaths that there have been in recent months and years on the streets, those are not an issue for the people that think, as Ben Leo pointed out, that there is some greater purpose to their pursuit. And so that's why I can't help but be nervous about this. And then when we also look at what Reuters, the global news agency, has said from Tehran, which is that in order for the nuclear discussions to start, then there has to be $25 billion of frozen Iranian assets unfrozen, as well as other punishments that have been put onto Iran's economics, other sanctions to be lifted. And so it doesn't sound to me like the regime will be too unhappy with this deal. I note, though, that some of the reports coming out of Iran say that hardliners have claimed that this deal being signed is a shame, brings shame on the late Ayatollah who was killed. So clearly not everyone in Iran is happy about it. But the final thing I'd say is that I worry that Iran being able to exercise this power in recent months with its being able to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is where 20% of the world's oil and gas goes through there, which is why it's had such a dramatic effect on all of our economies. Once they've done that once, who's to say that they can't do that again? And now they know that the trick works.
Yeah, Hillary, it's a fair point. And I was speaking to Barry Gardner on the late edition with Alex Armstrong earlier, and drones have fundamentally changed warfare. The days of a massive navy being able to control a body of water like that are over. If you have a relatively cheap, small but fast drone force that can, without losing any lives on their end go and attack naval vessels. It changes the calculus completely. I noticed you were shaking your head at Benjamin there. What do you make of that point and Benjamin's comments more generally?
Well, actually, one of the things I loved about what Benjamin said is, I had read this earlier, was that when they are saying, the hardliners in Iran are saying that this is a shame and a smear on the late Ayatollah's memory. Yes, great, because we know what he stood for, and we know what he did to the world, and we know what he did to his own people. So I thought that's actually rather good news. But now, in all seriousness, with regard to drones, absolutely, drones have changed everything to do with warfare. Actually, in some regard, rather well, or rather a good note, because it will hopefully drones will save lives, because it's more like sort of a kamikaze machine versus kamikaze people or anyone having to go to war and the bloodshed. But you're right. I mean, there only needs to be a few drones here and there. But to my earlier point, though, again, the only thing that is more important to religious fanatics and their higher calling is that they care about themselves financially and they care about their own survival. And they're fearful because I believe that what President Trump will have done with all of this is put on financial handcuffs, and there will be stipulations and stakes in the ground for every single move they try to make. And as I mentioned before, my only real concern and fear with all of this is the next administration in the US and maybe other governments that might want to go back and backtrack and somehow change this. Hopefully, all of the world, though, wants peace and wants prosperity.
Yeah, Mark, so I've been reflecting, and again, we are getting all of this news in a very fluid environment, but I've been reflecting on these comments from Trump and the way that he's framed what would happen if Tehran was to not stick to the deal. And it's interesting that he says restart military attacks or that particular arrangement of making America the guardian of the Middle East and taking 20% of the revenues along the way. To me, that feels like an admission of some vulnerability. I think it would have been stronger if he just said, well, if they don't agree to the deal, we're going to blow Tehran to smithereens or end Iranian civilization, as he was saying a month or two ago. By doing this and saying, well, you know, we could start attacks again, we could basically become the policeman of the Middle East once more and take some oil money along the way, to me that feels surprisingly wishy-washy from a man who was, again, saying that he would blow the country to smithereens not so long ago.
I think jaws are dropping across the United States as people read that sentence, certainly 180 degrees different than what was promised on the campaign trail in 2024. And you know the saying that history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes? Let's think back to the last peace deal that President Trump negotiated in the Middle East in his first term, which was with the Taliban. And that set the timeline for withdrawal of U.S. troops that was later executed by President Biden. Now, under President Biden, that withdrawal, 13 American service members were killed at Abbey Gate. That was a botched withdrawal. Now, fast forward to the second Trump administration, 13 American service members killed in the conflict with Iran, when Iran attacked U.S. military bases. So is President Trump really prepared, again, to put mass boots on the ground in the Middle East and make another deal? I don't know, but I definitely share your concern, Will, that a lot of people are going to look at that statement, guardians of the Middle East, guardian of the Middle East, and wonder what in the heck is the U.S. going to get itself into?
You remember, Paul, there were conversations, you know, we go back 20, 25 years to George W. Bush. There was the debate around whether or not America should be the world policeman. In many ways, the Trump presidency is a response to what some people would call that sort of, you know, neoconservative agenda. He won office in many ways on an America first, isolationist foreign policy. And now he is floating the idea, and it's open to interpretation how serious it is, but he's floating the idea of being the Middle Eastern policeman once more.
Yeah, one thing is for certain, there's a tremendous amount of contradiction that's taken place since the beginning of this war to now in terms of the optics and the rhetoric. I don't want there to be huge war in the world. Of course I don't. However, if you're going to take on a despot, theocratic regime like Iran, then you're going to have to show them the type of thing they respect. And that would be overwhelming strength. And I'm not sure that we've seen that really from the US. As much as I welcome what Bev has said and what Hillary has said in terms of the optimism of this and at least portraying it in a way that looks like a tremendous success. I'm much more in Ben Leo's camp in the sense that what have we seen that's different between February and June of 2026? And the memorandum of understanding, as pointed out by Ben, is a deal to work out a deal. Well, what are we signing on the next Friday at the G7? That's the signing so that we can start to talk about the new deal. Where does it lead us to? If I could bring this home just for a very quick moment, Will, all of this says to me, from the perspective of Great Britain, is we need much more sovereignty than we currently have. We need sovereignty to make our own decisions, we need sovereignty of fuel supply, and we need to be able to build our economy. So we ought to be looking at ways of being less impacted by world events. The more things are globalised, the more impacted we become.
Well, have no fear, because Ed Miliband is looking to ban your underfloor heating, so he's well and truly thinking about your concerns there, Paul. I want to go to geopolitical expert Kate Jones now. Kate, thank you for joining us on what is a historic evening in America, partially for this deal and partially because on the President's 80th birthday, we're about to watch mixed martial arts on the White House lawn. Again, I never thought I would be promoting or discussing a peace deal in the Middle East and a UFC fight at the same time, but here we are. This is the world of Donald Trump now. What do you make of what you've seen recently?
On the UFC fight or on the...
We'll get to your tips later.
Yes, maybe there are some parallels. So I think that this is a ceasefire with an MOU, and the MOU is something we're really not seeing the contents of that, but we've heard plenty about it, and it looks like a discussion about what they will do with the nuclear material, and each side has to sell it at home. That is absolutely the case. But I think that there's a deeper moment that's occurred here in terms of Iran's ability to project power. We heard testimony during this fairly recently from Admiral Cooper saying that there weren't so many of these fast boats attacking ships anymore, and that the U.S. Navy had the capability to allow ships to transit through the straits, but they did not have the desire to and the trust to at this moment. So they also have said that the degraded capability, not just of the Navy, but the ability to produce boats, the degraded capability to produce drones. I think they said they had gotten them down to roughly 10% left, and also degraded their in general industrial capability to produce ballistic missiles as well as the missiles themselves. So if that is the case, and then you add the blockade and the impact of the blockade on their ability to collect revenue, and in addition, all of the actions by the Treasury to cut off the ability to act inside the global economy, Iran is probably in a horrific situation economically at this moment. They were going into the crisis not doing particularly well. So I think at this stage, there is impetus on both sides to end the conflict, and that is very real. The process will probably be as it has been, a lot of nagging. But I think that we actually have the best chance at it now as the capabilities have been degraded, and we're not seeing so many of these fast boats.
Well, Kate, you said it's a horrific situation for Iran, and the way that you framed that, I largely agree. At the same time, and this has been a consistent throughout this conflict, their capacity to endure pain is significantly higher than the United States. They are an evil dictatorship. They don't care about, the pain that their people go through. If their economy is suffering, so long as they can continue grinding on, then they will endure. And similarly, as we were talking about with Hillary Fordwich earlier, the way in which modern warfare has changed, you can get by in a conflict like this with a collection of drones, admittedly drones that have been depleted, but you can still withhold the might of the American Navy with drones in the Strait of Hormuz. So my question would be, given that America has very real domestic pressures around this conflict, economic pressures, is there the risk here that Donald Trump is rushing to a deal which ultimately would give Iran more power and more ability to be able to recover than if he just said, right, we're going to end this regime once and for all?
I think markets have shown robustness, and they've held up remarkably well despite the conditions. I think it's hit everyone else a lot harder than it has hit the United States, which has the energy independence. And also, the deregulation in the system has allowed for businesses to be quite lucrative. The earnings reports are very good. The jobs reports are good. So I think that in terms of degrading the U.S. economy, I think it's really more about the midterms and the risk to the midterms than actually the risk to some sort of catastrophic experience in the U.S. And there are many different levers that can be pulled to mitigate against the economic issues. So in terms of that, I think that it's holding up, and maybe the endurance race, the U.S. is going to win that. In terms of the drone strikes, we haven't actually seen drone strikes that have been effective against the U.S. Navy. They've been against commercial ships that have no capacity to endure such a strike. And they've also they've hit in ways that were careful not to be too destructive into engaging into deeper acts of war. And in terms of we've been seeing these Apache with the 30mm chain gun pretty effective against those fast boats and also those drones. So they're flying them in the UAE, they're flying them, the US has them. So they've been very effective. So have the lasers, but not in the wet weather conditions. And so has been the netting. So while those bases, true, they cannot fully defend against any of these kinds of attacks. They've had to step away. And that is its own kind of issue. I do not believe that the situation with the drones is quite the same as what we see in Ukraine because of the air dominance that we see and some of the methods that they've used.
Yes. So, Kate, I'm just looking at the live scenes from the White House where, of course, that UFC bout is set up. It is a bit unclear. I thought I saw on the big screen there Donald Trump in motion. I may be making that up in my own mind. Do you expect is there any expectation that he may make a statement at the UFC?
Who knows? He might, but I think, much of this is ahead of the G7 as well. So the G7 meeting's coming up in Evian in France. And I think that maybe this is one of the reasons on the 19th they want to do this signing. In terms of for the U.S. audience, he's very much committed to the fact that it's Flag Day. It's the birthday of the U.S. Army. It's a big celebration and very much the kickoff of all the celebrations going into the July 4th period for the 250th birthday. And, I think in terms of this fight match, this is interesting to me because historically Teddy Roosevelt had boxing matches in the White House, as you know. So, interesting choice, but it seems very popular. I don't think we're going to see a statement. If we do, it'll be light and small compared to the celebratory evening that's at the White House.
Well, as I've said throughout the morning, just don't take the memorandum of understanding and then wave it over your head, Donald, with a little smile on your face. As history has proven, it has the capacity to backfire upon you. Thank you very much, Kate Jones, for joining us this morning. Let's go back to the panel now. I'll go to London first. I will go back to Paul Cox, and I want to go with an update that we are getting from the Telegraph, where where the Telegraph is quoting Trump, who has said Iran's uranium stockpile is now harmless. So on Thursday, the president hinted the uranium. Oh, we're standing by for the president. Let's go live. So that is US President Donald Trump with the head of the UFC, Dana White. This is during the rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. Donald Trump, of course, is putting on a UFC event after announcing a memorandum of understanding in advance of a peace deal that has been announced to be signed in Switzerland on Friday. America does this sort of patriotism better than any other country. Paul Cox, what do you make of the scenes that you're currently seeing from the White House?
Yeah, it's extraordinary, really. I'd love to see what we would do. Nothing similar to this. Can you imagine Keir Starmer putting together a tickling competition on the lawns of Downing Street? I don't think it'd be quite as patriotic as this. It's interesting because one thing this does do, irrespective of all the things that are going on around it, it connects the president with the regular man and woman on the street in the US. You know, MMA is incredibly popular in the US. I think Donald Trump has identified that. I think he genuinely enjoys it himself.
It's also that it's popular with a very particular segment of the American population.
That's a very good point.
Class, it's more MAGA. And it's more of an FU to the liberal progressive elites who would no doubt talk about things like concussion or talk about things like, then it's not compatible with the modern world. This is the type of sport that the, Manhattan cocktail party set does not like.
No, of course, and that's exactly why he's doing it. As you've rightly pointed out, it's very masculine. Although women do fight in MMA, but it's an aggressive sport. It's something that Donald Trump himself would champion. It represents the US well in his image. People fighting for the honor. This is exactly what this is about, and Donald Trump would have us believe that's exactly what he and the US is about on the world stage. And to be honest, I don't have any issue with that. It's good to see. I mean, a United States under Biden was incredibly weak. You look at the optics of Biden, the man who could barely stand up, needed a nap every 3 hours in order to get through the day. Previously to that was Obama, who was, obviously Trump was in between, but previous to that was Obama, a man that was all about the optics, all about being seen as, a great CEO of the USA. So what Donald Trump is trying to do is bring back the strength of the USA optically and show the world that this is, this is a proud country with proud traditions and a lot to look forward to in the future.
I think, again, as I said to Paul Cox earlier in this show, the weirdness, the wackiness, the surrealness of the Trump years, we perhaps now take for granted, but I want you at home to just stop and reflect on what you're seeing. You're seeing on a UFC bout on the White House lawn. This current footage, it looks more like, some of the festivals that I went to in my youth, as opposed to what there's Melania there following President Trump. This is not the quiet dignity that you have traditionally associated with the presidency, but I guess now 10 years into the Trump era, we are well past that. What do you make of what you're seeing? We'll go to the DC panel. What do you make of what you're seeing, Hillary?
Oh, I think it's absolutely smashing, isn't it? It's beautiful, lovely. And I will say the spirit of this, it couldn't be any better. What would President Trump want on his birthday? I can't imagine anything better than this deal signing. So I think to the point that you made earlier, Will, and others have made, I don't think there's any coincidence with this timing. Ben and both Bev said the same thing. So I think it's all been done in line. And with regard to this, I thought that when the King was over, hopefully the King was very impressed, because we always think in England and the UK that we have great, pomp and pageantry. This is rather lovely, I do think. I think it's well done. Look at how beautiful it is. And with the sun sort of gradually setting there, with the sunset on the White House, what a better night to have peace and prosperity celebrated than with the military that didn't have to shed any of their blood, with no boots on the ground. I think that's great news.
I would note there perhaps is a certain irony celebrating peace and prosperity when two blokes are about to beat the living daylights out of each other. But I take your point.
Well, Mark, rather it's that.
Mark, what do you make of this?
Sure. So a couple of things. First of all, I definitely want to keep in our thoughts the 13 American service members who were killed in the attacks from Iran on U.S. facilities, not in Iran, but in the Middle East. Two things about this. First of all, Paul was absolutely correct that the UFC is one of the most commercially successful of the leagues in the U.S. However, according to a Reuters poll this month, only 16% of Americans approve of this UFC event on the White House South Lawn. So it does not have broad support, at least to the poll by Reuters. The third thing I would say, actually, Speaking of at sunset, we are actually currently under a severe thunderstorm watch. The National Weather Service here in D.C. warning severe thunderstorms capable of producing damaging wind gusts, large hail, isolated tornadoes. I had the heck of a time getting back here today because of thunderstorms and weather flying back in. So there is this weather threat. You can maybe see the dark clouds in the distance. If there is lightning, I believe it's within 8 miles. Forgive my math, I think that's maybe 11 or 12 kilometers. They will have to pause the bouts.
Is the octagon, I can't see, is the octagon, which is what the UFC calls the ring for the uninitiated, is that covered at the moment?
No.
It is, yes, it is covered. You can see the claws, they're calling it, so the arch, but the arch actually has 2 parallel arches and then 2 perpendicular ones holding it up. So it covers the octagon, although with winds and rain, look, they're going to get wet if it starts raining. And Dana White, the UFC president, has said that outdoors is a very challenging environment to do these kind of bouts in, especially if it gets wet and there's the gnats and the mosquitoes. So there clearly are some climate and weather challenges today that they're looking at.
Benjamin, I had to drag myself out of this theatre temporarily because even I must admit in this moment for a minute or two there, as I'm looking at the ring, as I'm looking at the lights, as I'm getting more excited to see gladiatorial combat in all its forms, I forgot about the peace deal that is potentially coming on Friday. And what do you think? To what extent do you think this is potentially deliberate? To what extent do you think that this is a very deliberate diversion from the finer points of Middle Eastern geopolitics?
Well, Donald Trump has been living in a reality TV show for decades, and he keeps finding ways to continue that with another new episode, and that's exactly what he's used his 80th birthday for with this fight. I believe this has cost about $60 million, which the UFC has paid for. And I think that, you look
60 million?
60 million, yeah,
Yep.
6-0. And, the stats, the polls show that only 1 in 6 Americans are happy with the South Lawn of the White House being used in this way. It is not Donald Trump's house, it is the American people's house. And I think this is a pretty crass, tacky way to use that space. You think about how yesterday, in fact, Saturday at least, when we had Trooping the Colour, that was our great show of pageantry and tradition and patriotism. And I think Britain acted with considerable more dignity than this testosterone-fueled glitz fest that Donald Trump is putting on. And I also think it sends a sort of pretty unpleasant message in the idea that what you should celebrate is men brawling and fighting and being aggressive, rather than the peace or the stability or the success. And when most Americans are having a tough time because of the war that Trump started with Iran, I think they'll ask why he's spending all these hours on this
Just to interrupt you, Benjamin, sorry, but what we're seeing here is Dana White with Trump ringside or octagon side. I believe that is Melania in front of Trump in the background there. Again, you can't underestimate the political messaging here. Dana White himself is the CEO of a controversial sport, and he is a controversial figure. There was footage only as recently as 2022 of him slapping his wife in a Mexican nightclub in Cabo. Again, that's been put to one side by the White House here, it would seem. He is unapologetically anti-woke. He has engaged in culture war debates on several occasions where he has come down in a very Trump-aligned way, as we now watch the theatre well and truly start to crank up. But you can't underestimate, this isn't just what we're watching, a bit of fun for the masses. This is a very clear, in my eyes, political message from the President of the United States. And in many ways, it is an FU to that liberal elite that he has spent now over a decade antagonising. Hillary, back to you. I'll follow on with that. What is this, in your eyes, what is the messaging of this event that we are watching from a political perspective?
Well, that's a very interesting question because I think that we're polarized as a nation, obviously politically, but obviously sports-wise too. I mean, obviously, I'm a golfer. I'm not into, the UFC fights. I don't care, don't like it. And I think, to your point earlier, when I was saying about the military and there's no bloodshed, and you were saying, yeah, but we're gonna see two men fighting. I don't think that there's a political statement. It's more, I think that what he's doing, President Trump is doing, is pleasing his base. A lot of the MAGA supporters, and it's one of the most popular sports over here, quite frankly, these kind of fights. So for those people that love it, it's a political statement to please them, I think, and I think it's a celebration that this is a way that a lot of Americans like to celebrate, is to watching a fight like this. Each to his own is what I would say, and I think it's a pity that, just like in the UK and many parts of the world, everybody's polarized about absolutely everything. Again, not my taste, not my choice, but many people are going to be extremely happy with this, and maybe the political statement is better to have a fight in the ring versus bloodshed on the ground, like I mentioned, and Mark is very apt in saying, and he's very right in saying, we should never, though, forget those 13 service members.
Yeah, Paul, look, I can see where Benjamin is coming from. In some respects, I think this is cheapening the dignity and the grandeur of the White House and what it stands for. At the same time, the old rugby player in me and the testosterone is starting to rise, and as I'm starting to think of a bit of fighting coming our way, I'm getting quite excited too. So I am torn. How do you feel about this?
Well, I'm certainly less excited than you and Benjamin are about men wrestling. And I'm much more excited about golf in the same way Hillary is. However, isn't this gladiatorial? Isn't this of the Roman Empire? Isn't this something that's gone on for millennia? People enjoy two human beings battling it out against one another. We spend a lot of times in the contemporary modern world denying emotions exist, and what one thing like boxing and MMA does is allow those emotions to be expressed, and we can celebrate that without looking down our noses at it. I think I don't think it's a sport purely for the working classes. I can sort of feel myself as a working class person bristling slightly at the idea that we look down upon this. I don't want to look down upon this whatsoever. Of course, I don't condone some of the things you mentioned about Dana White, for instance. However, this is something that's incredibly popular. This is a president that has been elected on this basis because he too is popular. So he is expressing his popularity through something else that's popular. And there will be lots of people in the US, I'm sure, that will be enjoying these men wrestling outside of their great house.
Yeah, Mark, I'll go back to that question I asked earlier. To what extent do you think that this is a deliberate distraction from the situation in Iran, and to what extent do you think it's a distraction from, again, those technical implementation details, which is the way that it's being framed, that still need to take place as we lead into this signing on Friday?
I actually think there's a political danger here with this fight tonight. I was digging into the numbers of the Reuters poll, and only 31% of Republicans, the base that Hillary mentioned, said yes, it's appropriate to hold mixed martial arts fighting on the South Lawn of the White House. And I think that when Americans see grocery prices up 20%, when they see their gasoline prices up 40%, when they see money being spent on the reflecting pool on the National Mall, which now has algae in it a few days after it's been opened, they see the president saying perhaps we should be the guardian in the Middle East. They are dealing with the fallout of the unilateral tariff wars. I think that there's the same danger here as with tearing down the East Wing and building a ballroom. And I just wonder whether there are more Americans than we know looking at this and saying, this is not what I want our president focused on, and this is not what I want the White House focused on right now. I wonder, looking at the internal polls here, where only 31% of Republicans find this, what you're watching right now, appropriate.
Well, this is a really interesting question that you've alluded to. Hillary, in recent weeks and months, Donald Trump has appeared to put a lot of time and energy into, redoing the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. He keeps going on about the White House ballroom. We're currently watching UFC at the White House. He is trying to put his face on the $250 bill. All potentially have arguments in their favour, but I would suggest none of them would make the top 1,000 priorities of the United States at the moment. Is Donald Trump still focused on the job at hand, or is he now more focused on a series of vanity projects to try and bolster his legacy as he enters the final 2 years of his presidency?
Well, I think you actually hit the nail on the head there. I think lots of these are actually vanity projects. If I had any advice for President Trump and the White House, it would be you've got to stay laser focused on what matters. The number one priority. Every single politician, every single president, their electability is directly correlated to pocketbook issues, always. That's what the American public feels and sees. And when people actually, they're not watching necessarily GB News tonight, sorry. They're not watching the nightly news ever necessarily. They may not even know what's going on. The only thing that I would say every single American, except actually for the global elites and except for the politicians, know about is the price at the petrol pump. That's what they know about because they see it, they feel it. And even I'm not a poor person, but I notice when the double the price of petrol when you filled up your car and you filled up your tank. Everybody else, other than those with chauffeurs, and like I said, the global elites, we all feel it. Now, I will say one thing also with regard to President Trump putting his name on the $250 bill. First
Hillary,
of all,
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I've got to interrupt you because there is, I think, potentially more significant breaking news that I'm reading coming out of the Times, and it goes to the Iran deal. Benjamin, I'm going to go to you on this. From what the Times is reporting, Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected the Lebanon clause in the Memorandum of Understanding, which will lead to a deal. So the Times, Benjamin Netanyahu is rejecting the Lebanon clause of the US-Iran agreement announced by Pakistan, telling President Trump the Israeli Defense Forces will not withdraw from Lebanon and that Israel does not consider itself bound by the clause. And this is coming from, well, I'm getting it from the Times and they are getting it from the Hebrew language Mariv outlet. The main message, Israel has an independent security strategic interest in Lebanon and it intends to stand by it. Analysts suggest the latest Israeli attacks on Beirut inadvertently helped seal the deal by allowing Iran to extract final concessions from the United States. I want to, and this again follows as well, comments that Trump made to Axios reporter Barak Ravid, in which he suggested that Netanyahu had no effing judgment and overplayed his hand. So, to clarify that, Benjamin Netanyahu, according to the Hebrew language outlet Mariv, is rejecting the Lebanon clause in the US-Iran agreement. How does that change things?
Well, there's long been this battle between Hezbollah in Lebanon and the northern Israel and the IDF. And I think that one of the problems that's come up from this deal is that the Trump-Netanyahu relationship has been damaged. I think Trump made very negative comments recently about Netanyahu being uncontrollable when he made attacks on Beirut. Now, the deal, the memorandum, we should say, that is looking like it will be agreed, combines US and Iran, but it does not compel Israel, which is, according to these reports, one of the things that Netanyahu has pointed out. They might not want them to get involved, but they cannot stop them. And I think one of your guests earlier on made the point that if a country cannot defend all of its borders and all of the people within it from constant missile attacks, which is what Israel has been subjected to for many years from Hezbollah, then is it really a sovereign country? And so that was going to be a significant barrier because Israel is not going to give up the defence, given that it's had such a long and bloody and difficult history. I think what will be interesting is to see what President Trump says publicly about this. And this is also one of the other challenges, which is that, you know, Trump, as we will see him on stage shortly, will be talking maybe about this deal being struck on his 80th birthday, but it won't be signed until they meet in Switzerland for the G7 on Friday. And so could this mean that Netanyahu's position and Israel carrying on to attack Lebanon, which could happen in the coming days, could actually destabilise the deal before it's even signed?
Yeah. So as we discussed, potentially Israel taking issue with the With the Memorandum of Understanding, we're also seeing fighters in the ring. There is movement there. It looks like we are approaching our first bout. I never thought I would be discussing the finer points of a Middle Eastern peace deal whilst also commenting on UFC at the same time. What a time to be alive. I'm incredibly excited. Let's go, before the fight begins, to that comment from the outlet. It was the Israeli outlet, Hebrew language Israeli outlet. I haven't quite got the name, it escapes me. But they're saying that Israel doesn't stand by the clause which is being suggested in a Memorandum of Understanding, which would bind Israel to not continuing hostilities in Lebanon. What do you make of that, Paul?
Well, it's an immediate problem, isn't it?
Isn't it just?
Look, Donald Trump has pretty much said, without saying it exactly directly, that Benjamin Netanyahu will have to swallow whatever deal that Donald Trump sees fit for Israel. And of course, that in itself is a major issue. There are two main parties in this outside of the US, and that is Iran and Israel, because Israel is almost, if not the de facto representation of the Western world within the Middle East. And Donald Trump, it would appear, although obviously we don't have direct evidence of this, proceeded when he did at the end of February on the basis of Benjamin Netanyahu's advice. And for the deal to end without Benjamin Netanyahu being able to agree the terms, I think will mean that we don't have a deal. Yes. Because what happens, let's hypothetically put this to our viewership. What happens if the Memorandum of Understanding is agreed, it continues to the point where it becomes a deal, yet Hezbollah attack the northern parts of Israel? Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to not respond. So then you've got Benjamin Netanyahu involved in a war with Lebanon outside of the agreement of this peace deal, which takes us back to exactly where we were, just with a lot of lives lost.
Yeah. For clarity, for clarity, there is the Hezbollah are based in Lebanon. They are a proxy army. They are funded by Hamas. My suggestion would be that they don't, not by Hamas, they're funded by the Iranians. They would not do, I would suggest, any major movements or take any major initiative without the support of the Iranians. And so when you think about that particular group, you really do need to think of them as an extension of the Iranian regime, which is why this is such a significant component. The Lebanon component is such a significant component of any future peace deal. Hillary, what do you make of that particular reporting coming out of Israel, that potentially Benjamin Netanyahu will reject that clause with respect to Lebanon, potentially throwing the entire deal into a state of uncertainty?
Well, on the one hand, I would say, obviously, I don't blame the Israelis with how much they've been under attack, what they've suffered. And certainly the US, obviously, we've gone literally to war against anybody who's done anything to us, let alone what they've suffered after October 7th and even since, October 7th and since. However, it's really a dreadful disappointment that the potential of maybe lasting peace is thwarted by this. I'm hoping maybe President Trump and his team can come up with something that will both assuage Netanyahu and the Israelis in general and keep this on track, because it would be dreadful to have everything thwarted and all their efforts thwarted and any chance of overall peace thwarted due to their concerns, which, again, I do think are valid, but great pity, and puts a real damper on the news we were celebrating tonight and the hope of peace across the world, let alone prosperity.
Mark, your thoughts on the dynamics between Netanyahu, Trump, and then more broadly this suggestion that they will not sign up to a deal which includes that clause around Lebanon?
Well, Axios and Barak Aviv have been doing amazing reporting. Essentially, they report something, and then the president comes out to another outlet 90 minutes later and says, yeah, I said that. And so they have really a remarkable track record on reporting on the relationship between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. But the Iranians have been crystal clear in that there must not be hostilities in Lebanon from Israel. That has been, so far, one of their red lines. And so if Israel is opting itself out of this deal, and we don't know how involved Israel was in the crafting of the deal between the U.S. and Iran, but if Israel is going to opt themselves out of this deal, this memorandum of understanding, whatever form it takes, is it dead on arrival? That's what we don't know.
Yep. Yeah, it is food for thought, and we're going to continue that thought as we go into our third hour. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what more you could want. We are going to mix the gladiatorial combat of the of UFC with hard-hitting geopolitical analysis. On the same night of Donald Trump's 80th birthday, we have UFC on the White House lawn. We also have a memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States. It's all to play for. This is very exciting. Stay with us on the People's Channel, GB News.
Today, clouds overhead, total zen within. Boxed Solar sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Lots of fine and dry weather around today, feeling warm where we see any sunny spells, though we are expecting some spots of rain this morning. This mostly across Northern Ireland, northwest Wales, central and southeast England. We have a band of showers moving their way northeastwards, and we may hear the odd rumble of thunder associated with these. Otherwise, it should be mostly dry, though there's a fair amount of clouds starting to push into the west, this turning fairly low across southern coasts of Wales, southwest England, so a little bit disappointing here. But otherwise, in any bright or sunny spells, feeling warm, temperatures widely pushing into the mid-20s. Now, as we progress later on into the day, gradually turning more unsettled across the north, these showers will push their way northeastwards across Scotland, merging into longer spells of rain, turning that a little bit heavier across the hills. Plenty of clouds finish off the day across Northern Ireland, some showers here, similar across many northern areas of England. Now, elsewhere across England and Wales, it should be mostly dry, just a few showers starting to clip in to the west by the end of the day, but quite a lot of cloud around into the evening, some quite low cloud leading to some murky conditions, and this will be thick enough to produce some light outbreaks of rain and drizzle. And this rain across parts of the north will continue to be heavy, especially across the hills, perhaps a little bit blustery as it drifts its way northeastwards, but a much milder start to Tuesday compared to what we've had this morning. Temperatures across the south not dropping much past the mid-teens. Now, on Tuesday, once again, we've still got this rain across the far north of Scotland. It'll eventually clear its way northeastwards. Lots of clouds, still some spots of rain and drizzle following on behind. Turning a little bit brighter for some areas into the afternoon, but once again, a return of the rain across Wales, parts of Devon and Cornwall later into the day, and this could turn heavy. The best of the brightness is going to be across the far east, highs reaching 26 Celsius.
Today, clouds overhead, total zen within. Boxed Solar sponsors the weather on GB News.
Britain deserves a newsroom that puts the facts and your voice first.
Well, and that's what you get on GB News. Lively debates, lively conversation.
And we're not afraid to hold power to account.
And each other. So join me, Andrew Pierce.
And me, Miriam Cates, for Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 on GB News.
Bold. They are under no illusion.
Ray, are you a human trafficker? Boundless. I've had enough of the nonsense, and I'm not afraid to say it.
Don't get us on the BBC.
Every weeknight, I tear through the headlines.
The smell of gasoline. Should we be worried about it?
From Westminster madness to cultural war chaos.
What I'm going to do now, they are throwing things out the car as we speak.
Get ready, Britain. Here we go. Patrick Christie tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
So he can say whatever he wants.
A straight talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From court mornings
to warm family brunches,
from football to tennis in the car,
in the kitchen.
GB News breakfast
is there.
With the stories you need and the conversations that matter.
Anyway, let's talk business.
Well, it has been a historic night in British politics.
It's astonishing, isn't it?
We're here again to start your day just right. GB News Breakfast.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No, that's it. This is where it matters. Real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
The fact that Trump made a good start, no.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints. How many fingers have I got up?
About 10.
So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m. only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Some people enjoy lazy Sunday mornings, but not me.
What's the truth of the matter? So that's a very live question. Would you support him if he waters down these plans?
Before the spin sets in, I'll be getting to the truth.
This is personal.
No soft questions, no easy answers.
It's one thing if the state has rules in this country. It's another thing whether the police and others actually police them.
Setting the agenda and holding those in power to account.
You can't really blame her if the system is set up this way. You will not want to miss it, trust me.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sundays from 9:30, only on GB News.
Welcome back to The Late Show Live with me, Will Kingston, on a historic and, quite frankly, surreal night. We have, quite possibly now, peace in Iran, at least for now. Donald Trump says a deal with Iran is now complete. Writing on Truth Social, the US president said, and I quote, "The deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran is now complete. Congratulations to all. I hereby fully authorise the toll-free opening of the Strait of Hormuz and simultaneously herewith authorise the immediate removal of the United States naval blockade. Ships of the world, start your engines. Let the oil flow." President Donald J. Trump. But it's not quite that simple, I would suggest. Earlier, Iran's deputy foreign minister said Iran's commitment will take effect from Friday and armed forces will always have their finger on the trigger. That has been somewhat contradicted by the Iran Security Council, which came out about an hour ago and said that they would cease hostilities in the lead up to that deal being signed in Switzerland on Friday. So some confusing messaging, perhaps unsurprisingly, coming from the Iranian regime. But our understanding is that there will be a cessation of hostilities immediately. President Trump said in his interview since agreeing to the deal that the agreement he reached with Iran would ultimately assure that the Strait of Hormuz is permanently toll-free, and argued that despite the objections of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, he had saved Israel from, and I quote, nuclear obliteration. He told the New York Times that if Iran failed to reach a final nuclear accord with the United States, a process his aides say they expect will begin on Friday in Switzerland, he would restart military attacks on Tehran, or, and this has raised a lot of eyebrows, he will make the United States the guardian of the Middle East in return for 20% of the region's revenues. That is, of course, one of several interesting insights in interviews that he has given to the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, respectively. To the Wall Street Journal, he said he has never cared about regime change in response to a question on that topic. This would appear to be in tension with comments that he made in February, where he encouraged the Iranian people to rise up and take control of their own future. And all of this is happening, ladies and gentlemen, in the context of a massive UFC bout going on in the most theatrical of fashion on the White House lawn. The bout has started, or at least one of the bouts have started. So I'm finding myself in the unusual position of being part UFC commentator, part geopolitical analyst, and I'm here for it. Joining me in London is my panel, GB News contributor and comedian Paul Cox, and journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Buttonworth, and in Washington, DC, award-winning former journalist and founder of media advisory experts Mark Albert, and political commentator Hilary Fordwich. Thank you once again for joining me, one and all. Benjamin, I'll start with you again. I use the word surreal, and I think sometimes in the commentariat we are guilty of taking this for granted because we do this stuff every single day. We follow President Trump for a living. The footage that you're currently seeing was from slightly earlier, just before the Star-Spangled Banner played, where Trump was, and this is after a memorandum of understanding, of course, was agreed to. But there is no doubt that this is an evening which, again, if you were to tell someone in the year 2010 that this is what they would be watching in 2026, they would not have believed you.
Yeah, that much is definitely true. I mean, in many ways, it speaks to how Trump governs and how Trump behaves, in that nothing is ever small. Everything is big, whether it's the way he intends to resolve thousands of years of war and drama in the Middle East, or whether it's how he executes his 80th birthday with an enormous boxing match on the South Lawn of the White House. There's nothing subtle about what Trump does. I think that, you know, it will be no coincidence, I suspect, that he has made the announcement of this memorandum of understanding between the US and Iran to coincide with his 80th birthday. Of course, this enormous event taking place on the South Lawn tonight with 4,000 spectators will, as we are, be broadcast all around the world. And so it's an ideal opportunity to sell the story that he has reached some kind of, as he would put it, peace deal. In reality, it's yet to be thrashed out and will take a month or 2 months more to do that. But this is what he has to do, because he stood for his second term saying that he would not get involved in foreign wars and he would not waste tax dollars. And yet there's a lot of people, including on his own side of the Republican Party and the MAGA base, that think that's exactly what he did. And with midterm elections coming up in a few months, there's a lot of Americans that don't have the money in the pocket that they want. And partly that is because of the consequences of his involvement in Iran. And so he'll be hoping very intentionally tonight that this big spectacle for his birthday, for the UFC, also draws a line under the difficulties that have happened between the US and Iran since February.
The UN has waded in. Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN.
The UN and the UFC. What a combination tonight is.
What a night. What a treat for GB News viewers and listeners. Guterres has said, I warmly congratulate the US and Iran for having reached a peace deal that provides for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, as well as a framework for further negotiations. This represents a critical step forward towards the peaceful settlement of the conflict. My deep appreciation goes to Pakistan, Qatar, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and other regional countries for the constructive role played in supporting the negotiations that led to the peace deal. OK, typically meaningless and nothing input from the UN there. Paul, what do you make of what we're seeing? What are your reflections? You've been on TV now for this is going into the fourth hour. What do you make of everything?
Well, it is extraordinary, and the pictures we're seeing on screen now with Dana White and Donald Trump walking, or at this point standing at the top of the steps there at the White House, are something that's not usual. But what is usual anymore? This is the point I would like to make. The conventions, political conventions across the world, are being smashed day in, day out now. We used to have a two-party system. We used to have a two-party system in the UK. That's now a 3, 4, 5-party system. The US used to be a two-party system. We've got the Republicans, the Democrats, and the Donald Trump party, and the whole world, it seems, is changing shape just moment by moment, and I'm not sure where this ends. But with regards to MAGA, Donald Trump and America First, first things first is the US is a superpower. If it wasn't, then China would be. And what makes it a superpower, or if it is a superpower, its de facto position is, to some degree, to hold the world to account in the image it sees fit. So it probably has to go into somewhere like Iran and say, you are not going to be the disruptor you think you should be.
Yeah. Mark, I want to you to have that same wide lens as I've just encouraged Paul and Benjamin to view this evening with. Again, this is in many respects surreal, but now also normalised in the Trump era. What do you think what we have seen this evening tells us about politics in America in 2026?
Well, it tells us what we already know about President Trump, which is he likes things grand. So you're combining this UFC match on the White House South Lawn, I believe the first private sporting event ever to be held there, with this grand announcement of possibly an Iranian deal, this memorandum of understanding. But I would say if you sent Bev or Ben to any American city, let's say Omaha, Nebraska, where I was a couple of days ago, or Denver, Colorado, or Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and you said, do you want the U.S. to be the guardian of the Middle East in 2026? I wonder how many people would say yes, particularly those in the president's base. That is what I'm thinking tonight when I see these images juxtaposed with the announcement of the Iranian Memorandum of Understanding. And let's look at the calendar here, Will. So Congress is now out of session until June 23rd. So there is not going to be a scrum of media around all these members of Congress putting them on the spot. They will start to hear about this in their districts where they are for the next 8 days. So they are going to start being asked about what President Trump has done, what he has tweeted or posted or truth, whatever it's called on Truth Social, his truth. And this is going to dominate news coverage this week because in just a few hours, the president is leaving for France. And I have the G7 schedule right in front of me. He's there Monday. That's the bilateral with the French president, and then the official greeting and working dinner with the G7. Tuesday, he's meeting with the president of Ukraine. There's a bilateral meeting with the emir of Qatar. It goes on. And then Wednesday ends with a dinner at Versailles with the French president. He's meeting with the president of Egypt. And then, of course, we get to Friday, which is supposedly when the U.S. is supposed to sign this memorandum of understanding. This will dominate headlines now globally for the next week. And I don't know if that is an image that benefits the president.
Hillary, that same big picture question to you. As you reflect on this evening, what does this tell you about politics in America in 2026?
Well, I actually totally and utterly agree with Mark. I don't think if you went across this nation, even probably in Washington, D.C., if you ask people, is this what you really care about? President Trump and the entire administration has to be laser focused. As I mentioned, the direct correlation between what is in America referred to as pocketbook issues, that's handbag in England, but pocketbook issues, and which directly is correlated and comes from, obviously, the price of gas, because that affects 211 daily products. Actually, it even affects golf balls and diapers, which are nappies in England. Daily products, it affects the transportation of everything. If the price of gas comes down, it affects everything. That's what people vote on. Now, of course, this memorandum of understanding and of course peace in the Middle East does affect that, because that, of course, affects the price of gas, the price of petrol. It will bring it down in the long run. But I think the administration is looking too big picture and too globally. Americans do care about America first, my pocketbook first. That is what's on their mind, and it's the only thing that they're really aware of, because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm so sorry, but most people aren't watching the news day in, day out. They only look at their own lives and what they see at the pump.
And Will,
we will return to that sentiment of the American people shortly. But before we do, I want to go back to GB News' favourite chief US correspondent and presenter, Ben Leo in Boston. Ben, great to see you once again as darkness falls over Boston Harbour. We have had an evolving situation over the last couple of hours. We've heard the UN weigh in. We've heard there may be some friction between Israel and the US as to whether or not Israel can continue in Lebanon. We've also we've heard several more world leaders come and put their 2 cents in. What are the latest updates that have caught your eye in the last hour?
Hello, Will. Latest updates include the 4 European nations, including the UK, saying they'll be lifting sanctions on Iran. I mean, for me, from a UK perspective, the Labour government hasn't even yet prescribed the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And again, I'll repeat myself like a broken record. Labour, in opposition, got up at that dispatch box time after time, the likes of David Lammy, Yvette Cooper, saying to the Tories, why haven't you prescribed the IRGC? We'll do it as soon as we get into power. They got into power, Labour, Labour. They haven't done it, and now we're lifting sanctions on the IRGC. This deal, this memorandum of understanding, Mark Albert makes a great point there. You go to any of these cities in the US, maybe some Rust Belt towns and cities, and ask them about whether they care about the United States being the guardians of the Middle East. Absolutely not. They will not give two figs. They care about their gas prices. They'll probably be asking why they got involved in the Iran situation in the first place. The answer from the administration will be, well, Iran couldn't get hold of a nuclear weapon. Yes, we all support that, of course. We don't want Islamist despots getting hold of a nuke. Absolutely. However, this memorandum of understanding doesn't come to any sort of conclusion with regard to that nuclear issue. That will be discussed over the next 60 days. Also being reported tonight, the New York Times suggesting that the United States will be paying Iran $300 billion in pretty much war reparations to rebuild the country. I dread to think what people in those Rust Belt towns and cities think of paying Iran $300 billion after they spent even more billions of dollars of taxpayer money bombing them and still haven't got a resolution with regards to the nuclear issue. Also, the other situation that's on my mind tonight, I think of the poor protesters who gave their lives en masse, tens of thousands. The United States says Iran slaughtered 42,000 of them in January and February during the uprising in Iran. What do they think of this? Because they were promised and they were encouraged to take to the streets by the president to encourage regime change. Well, President Trump tonight says to the Wall Street Journal he doesn't care about regime change, and he doesn't care about it, and it's not top of his priority. So there we go. That's my thoughts on this Iran situation. We'll see what happens in the next couple of days or not.
Yeah, I'm trying to find more detail on that $300 billion figure. I just cannot believe that the US would sign up to that. I think you're right. It would go down absolutely atrociously amongst the American public.
Mate, you're an idiot.
As Ben Leo is dealing with members of the public. We will go. We'll leave Ben to deal with the joys of live broadcasting out in the open. But I do now want to go to geopolitical analyst and Iranian Shay Khatiri. Shay, thank you very much for joining me. You do wear two hats, of course. You are a member of the Iranian diaspora as well as being a geopolitical analyst. I want you to answer first, just as an Iranian, someone I imagine who still has a great deal of affinity for your homeland. What do you feel about the prospect of this deal potentially being signed this coming Friday?
My biggest worry is that in the prelude to the current war, the United States gave many hints that this was going to be a regime change war, and that was followed up by killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And Iranians had that hope, especially after the 40,000 people who were massacred in January. And my biggest worry is what's going to happen when the reality settles in for the average Iranian, that they cannot overthrow the regime on their own, and there's no foreign help in that regard. How are they going to react? And one worry that I have is that they might, as the saying goes, vote by their feet and just leave the country and become refugees in mostly Europe. And
we've just lost Shay's connection there, but when we did lose, we've got you there again, Shay. Please go on.
Okay. Sorry, I was saying that my biggest worry is how Iranians will react when they realize that they cannot overthrow the regime that killed 40,000 of them on their own, and that there's no foreign help to help them overthrow the regime, and how they are going to react. Are they going to succumb to their fate and, as the saying goes, vote by their feet and leave Iran for Europe and other destinations and become refugees? And if they stay in, how are they going to continue the fight against the regime, and what shape that would take, and what kind of anarchy possibly Iran could succumb into?
Well, that actually is a neat segue to my next question, which is, in the wake of a deal and in the wake of potentially 40, maybe even more, 40,000 of some of the bravest and most courageous Iranians being slaughtered by the regime when they rose up earlier in the year, how do you feel about the prospects of potential regime change in the months, perhaps years ahead? And do you think it has been made more or less likely as a result of this conflict?
I think in the long run, there is a possibility that some sort of internal reckoning within the regime will happen. Keep in mind that the new supreme leader, who's been missing, is new to this and is not as experienced or as rooted inside the regime as his father was. And different factions in Iran who have been waiting for Ali Khamenei's death might now find an opportunity to plot against him. But also, there is no guarantee that what if we as the free world do not intervene to help the better factions, that a better alternative triumphs, we could end up actually with even more hardline actors in charge. For instance, there was an effort to mobilize the most hardline supporters of the regime against this deal over the past few days, led by Saeed Jalili. There are reports that Jalili has been ousted as a member of the Supreme National Security Council. Now, is he going to be completely exiled, or is he going to be plotting to take power and push away people who were in favor of this deal? We don't know how this is going to change the future of Iran, but there are going to be some political earthquakes inside Iran, and we don't know how that will look like.
How did you feel about the comments that Donald Trump made to the Wall Street Journal earlier today when he said that he never cared about regime change?
Well, the administration has said many times that the regime change was not on the agenda. Then they said that regime change had already been effected because this was a new regime and new people were in charge, and that there was a consideration to arm the Kurds. We have reports about this, and last minute it was discarded at the objection of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the dictator of Turkey. So we have hints in all different directions that at least it was considered, if not tried. And as I mentioned, we killed the head of the state. When you kill the head of the state, it is very difficult to say that you're not trying to effect regime change. It contradicts the actions, the reporting, and some of the rhetoric of the president, including, as you mentioned, that he had said to Iranians to go take over your institutions, help is on the way. And on the other hand, Iranians have every reason to believe that they were being used as pawns, and that all of these this rhetoric of support was meaningless and cynical.
So we have a memorandum of understanding, but this week ahead there will be ongoing negotiations to nut out the finer details between both the United States and Iran. This is called, or they've been referring to this as the technical implementation of a proposed deal. Do you have any insight into how this is working on the Iranian side? We recall that at the very outset of this conflict, the top leadership layers of the Iranian regime were decimated. The Ayatollah was taken out. Our understanding is that the new Ayatollah is missing some limbs, and fair to say he's not in the best of shape. So I'm not sure how much use he would be in diplomatic strategy. How is this being conducted on their end, to the extent that we can have any idea of that?
There was certainly a there was factional differences. As I mentioned, hardliners were against this deal, and some for lack of a better term, by regime standards, more moderate elements were in favor of it, and including elements of the security forces were in favor of it. That's why it has been reached. However, you should keep in mind that the previous deal that was reached in 2015 JCPOA, that was reached in accordance to the consent of Ali Khamenei, the previous supreme leader, who later on said it was a mistake to agree to this. And now the first question is, will this deal will this deal be initially implemented? And two, can it sustain the political differences in Iran, and will they find some way to, when they get what they want out of this deal, to renege and discard it and return to whatever aggression that they deem fit and necessary at the time?
Sheikh Atiri, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We will now go back to our panel, of course, in London. We've got Paul Cox and Benjamin Butterworth, and I will start in London. There is a conversation closer to home, Paul, that needs to be had. Mr. Donahue on X has sent us a salient reminder. He said, has everyone forgotten that we have the IRGC and the Muslim Brotherhood operating freely in the UK? It's not over. It's a very good point, and that's where I want to start. There are malign forces in this country that, regardless of what deals are reached in the Middle East, Paul, are still very much a threat here. Do you think they're being taken seriously enough?
I am unsure whether they're being taken seriously enough. The concern, particularly from the right wing of politics, is that they're not, on the basis that it feels like, particularly with incidences happening week in, week out, that the left have turned a blind eye to this. However, look, political parties come and go, but what doesn't come and go is a religious ideology.
Yes.
The one thing that Iran have got as an advantage over the Western world is they've got this theocracy which they steadfastly stand by, irrespective and above their own lives. So the incumbent of the White House, the incumbent at number 10 Downing Street, will come and go over the next few years, and with it will come in new ideas, new philosophies. However, one thing will remain is that the IRGC will be in Iran, and they will be embedded around Western countries, notably London, notably the rest of the UK. Benjamin, I know, is quite familiar with this, and I'm sure he'll bring that to light very shortly. But we must remain concerned, because nothing that's happened tonight has changed the possibility of endless terror attacks in the UK.
Yeah, as Paul suggested, Benjamin, you've done a lot of work on foreign infiltration from malign Islamic forces in the United Kingdom. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, we have been fatally weak against the infiltration of Iran's regime for decades. About maybe 3 years ago, I spent some months doing an investigation into the IRGC's targeting and attempted assassinations of British citizens on British soil. And it came about after an Iranian friend of mine who lived in central London, and he was sent a disc on which it said in Farsi, the main language of Iran, that his father, who's under house arrest back in the country, would be waterboarded if he didn't stop criticising the regime.
Wow.
A couple of months after that, he was walking through central London, and someone asked him for the time in Farsi and then attempted to kidnap him into the back of a van. Now, he was provided with round-the-clock security at his central London flat, but there was no prosecution of the fact that these were clearly agents of the Iranian regime. And after I learnt that, I started investigating further, and I spoke to one woman called Anna Diamond. Now, she was taken prisoner in Iran when she was 19 or 20 years old. She was in the same prison as Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. And after she was put on given a death sentence at 21 in Tehran. And when she was eventually released back to Britain, thank goodness, she was left with lifelong damage, health conditions from her time imprisoned. And she would repeatedly get phone calls in South London when she was going to the hospital she regularly had to go to because of the damage from her imprisonment, in which an agent of the IRGC told her that we have infiltrated that NHS hospital, and we are going to kill you by posing as a nurse and poisoning you, and nobody will know we've done it. And so she, like the other person I reference, would report that. But it shows the extraordinary levels of threat and of infiltration on British soil that had been going on for years. Of course, we know that an Iranian news channel in West London had to be shut down for a period because the British state could not protect the Iranian journalists that worked for that channel, which was critical of the regime. And so I think that is why we've been fatally weak against these people. And, you know, the fact that we didn't proscribe the IRGC when this was happening speaks volumes to the fact that we thought we could look the other way and they wouldn't carry on. And so while I don't think Donald Trump has had a great success, and, you know, maybe we'll be proven wrong in coming days when we know more about this memorandum, but the fact is that the West has been failing to take on this threat, which is not just in the Middle East. It is on British streets, and it is especially acute against Jewish diaspora and Iranian diaspora who have made Britain their home. And if we fail to keep those people safe and protected in Britain, then how can we keep anybody safe?
I think they are stirring words, and some of those stories that you just suggested should shock anyone who is watching or listening to their very core. My question would be, when you talk about those malign forces in this country and the risks that they pose, how do you reconcile that with many of your colleagues on the left or the centre-left of politics who are relatively comfortable with a lax border policy and are relatively comfortable with high numbers from migration, particularly from Middle Eastern countries, many of whom have an ideological opposition to the West? How do you square that circle of saying we want to be hard on these forces, but we also want to be accepting of immigrants potentially from countries that share these types of views?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. One is that, you know, there are many Iranian migrants to Britain, and the notable majority of them have come here to flee an Islamic regime and share liberal Western values. That's why in recent months we've seen so many of them protesting on the streets, and you will see many of them flying Israeli flags rather more enthusiastically than some white Britons would choose to do. And so, you know, it is the case that they are here because they oppose that kind of politics. But there also is a direct link. So we know that one of the ways in which Iran's regime has been recruiting people to carry out the behaviour I just referred to is that they have tried to target people that have come across in small boats. They've tried to target people that have come here from Turkey, which is a security weak point. And because some of those people have debts, thousands of pounds maybe, for the boat journey across the Channel, and because they are vulnerable once they get here, because they don't have status, they don't have work, they have tried to use those people to be agents and to be informers and to try and do some very dodgy work. So there is a direct link between some people coming across the boats and Iran's strategy on this.
If you're just tuning in, our production team haven't got the clips wrong. We are talking about a recent peace deal which has been announced by President Trump at the same time as he is attending a UFC fight on the lawn of the White House. As I said earlier, what a time to be alive. Let's go to our panel in DC. Mark, I'll go to you. First. What are your reflections on the way in which, and I'll extend this out both to the US and the UK, the way in which the IRGC and the Iranians have been able to infiltrate the United States and the United Kingdom, and the threat that that now poses, even in the wake of a prospective peace deal?
We've been having a really interesting and vital conversation right now. And so let me just remind your viewers that in March, ABC News reported that the U.S. intercepted coded messages that they believed, quote, to have originated in Iran that may serve as an operational trigger for sleeper assets outside the country. And it then cited preliminary signals analysis. It was a warning by law enforcement sent out to agencies across the country. So this is a real threat, whether it's in the UK or here in the U.S., and it's something clearly that U.S. authorities likely had in mind as they were negotiating this deal. It's unknown, of course, what those sleeper cells look like, where they are, how many there may be in this country or in the UK, but absolutely that is a vital conversation to have.
Yeah, Hillary, the fundamental problem this country faces, and it is not just with respect to the IRGC and threats coming out of Iran, but more generally, the United Kingdom has in recent decades let in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are hostile to the country's values, its history, its culture, and what it fundamentally believes in. And no peace deal in the Middle East is going to change that. Do we need to take this particular threat more seriously?
Well, absolutely. And in fact, just as Mark was speaking so aptly on this, one of our viewers reached out to me, and Mr. Donahue, and he said, well, with this peace deal, just remember the IRGC and the Muslim Brotherhood is alive and well on the streets of the UK. To his point, and now to your question, yes, absolutely. And look at what we saw this past weekend and last night across the UK, from Brighton to, I believe, obviously Southport and to Birmingham, different cities across the UK where we saw riots in the streets with people actually protesting and saying we want Britain back. We saw Britain burning in many areas, not the least of which, of course, was Belfast and Edinburgh. So one of the things I think is that the Defence Secretary, when John Healey resigned, he said, well, we have the money for benefits, but not bullets. And what I understand is, I believe that the number of illegals that have been let in far exceeds the standing military that we have. So I don't want to tempt Providence by even raising it, but if there was some sort of uprising from all of these illegals and the Muslim Brotherhood and the IRGC, who on earth and what would be fighting them, unless it's the British population, of course, which has had enough of this?
Yeah, on this show yesterday we reported on a story from the Express that was talking about a study that said 100,000 plus illegal migrants are still in this country after they've been rejected by the Home Office. I was speaking to Matthew Torbett at the time, and he said to me, I can't remember if it was off air or on air. I think it was on air. And he said, Will, that number doesn't even scratch the surface from the research that I have done. We are talking millions of illegal migrants who do not have a legal right to be here, who have been rejected, but because they just get a letter from the Home Office and then suddenly they say, OK, well, you know, go off to Heathrow when you get a chance. None of them actually do it. Surprise, surprise, and that danger and that threat is just getting greater and greater. It's something which I think we are right in discussing. We're going to keep this conversation going on what is a historic, surreal, fascinating and incredibly important night for the world. But before we do, something which is also fascinating, surreal and important, and that is your weather.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Box Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Lots of fine and dry weather around today. Feeling warm where we see any sunny spells, though we are expecting some spots of rain this morning. This mostly across Northern Ireland, northwest Wales, central and southeast England. We have a band of showers moving their way northeastwards, and we may hear the odd rumble of thunder associated with these. Otherwise, it should be mostly dry, though there's a fair amount of clouds starting to push into the west. This turning fairly low across southern coasts of Wales, southwest England, so a little bit disappointing here. But otherwise, in any bright or sunny spells, feeling warm, temperatures widely pushing into the mid-20s. Now, as we progress later on into the day, gradually turning more unsettled across the north, these showers will push their way northeastwards across Scotland, merging into longer spells of rain, turning that a little bit heavier across the hills. Plenty of cloud to finish off the day across Northern Ireland, some showers here, similar across many northern areas of England. Now, elsewhere across England and Wales, it should be mostly dry, just a few showers starting to clip in to the west by the end of the day, but quite a lot of cloud around into the evening, some quite low cloud leading to some murky conditions, and this will be thick enough to produce some light outbreaks of rain and drizzle. And this rain across parts of the north will continue to be heavy, especially across the hills, perhaps a little bit blustery as it drifts its way northeastwards, but a much milder start to Tuesday compared to what we've had this morning. Temperatures across the south not dropping much past the mid-teens. Now, on Tuesday, once again, we've still got this rain across the far north of Scotland. It'll eventually clear its way northeastwards. Lots of clouds, still some spots of rain and drizzle following on behind. Turning a little bit brighter for some areas into the afternoon, but once again, a return of the rain across Wales, parts of Devon and Cornwall later into the day, and this could turn heavy. The best of the brightness is going to be across the far east, highs reaching 26 Celsius.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Box Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Welcome back to The Late Show Live with me, Will Kingston. If you are just joining us, well, firstly, where have you been? But I forgive you. And to get you up to speed, we have a memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States of America. This is a precursor to an anticipated deal being signed this coming Friday. As you can imagine, there is a great deal of uncertainty that still surrounds this deal. There is uncertainty around whether or not Israel will agree to a clause which suggests that they can't continue operations in Lebanon. There is uncertainty as to what extent the United States has agreed to potential war reparations, which is being suggested by the Iranian state media. And all of this is going on at the same time as we have a UFC bout underway on the White House lawn, which is being attended by Donald Trump, the most incredible display of American theatre. This is a surreal night. It's a very important night in Middle Eastern political history. But I would suggest the longer-term ramifications will become clearer as we understand this deal. To help me with that, I'm delighted to be joined by Angie Wong, Republican strategist. Angie, thanks for taking the time. I want to start with, I guess, dichotomy between having Trump at the UFC whilst at the same time talking about a peace deal. To what extent can this deal be read as a rushed effort to try and get some sort of agreement done before all of this pageantry, before the economic pressures, particularly around gas, get worse, before the midterms? You know, has Trump been rushed into a deal here which will not be favourable to the United States?
Yes, and let's not forget, today is Donald Trump's 80th birthday as well. So on top of all this, he's trying to give himself a birthday gift by giving himself an exit ramp out of the Iran conflict, which is what he's been pushing for many, many months now. I was looking at the finer details of what's been released of this deal. Everything that has been released is pretty much under Trump's control, including reopening the Straits of Hormuz, right? And a 60-day negotiation process to determine the future of Iranian nuclear programs. So these are things under his control. It is an interesting rollout. You know, we've seen this movie before where there's a peace deal on the table and the whole thing collapses. But this time it feels a little bit different, mainly because the Prime Minister of Pakistan announced it, then Trump announced it, then Iranian negotiators announced it. So it seems as though the parties have finally come together to put a framework together. What I'm fearful of is that there are fractions of the IRGC that could harm the Straits of Hormuz, let's say, if they try opening it after the signing on Friday. There could be problems in Lebanon. It could blow up this week because, well, you know, just to kind of bring us back to square one and, you know, take away any kind of gains built upon these negotiations. So there's a lot of things that can happen between now and the signing on Friday.
More fundamental concerns here which put a potential deal in jeopardy, and that is that the Iranians in their 47-year history since the fall of the Shah have never stuck to a deal. They remain a theocratic death cult determined to annihilate the state of Israel. They can't be trusted. What gives you the confidence that we can trust a deal that may be signed in the weeks ahead when every other deal in almost 50 years hasn't been stuck to on the part of the Iranians?
And that's the wait and see right now. We have a verbal agreement, an oral agreement, but that doesn't mean anything until we actually see something on paper. And I think that's where we have to kind of look towards. On top of that, my question is, what did Trump have to give up to get these, you know, all these fractions together in order to even make it to Friday? Are we now looking at something Trump was criticizing just, you know, years ago with Obama's deal, with his JCPOA deal? Is Trump going to now unfreeze funds that Iran has in Doha, for example, the $6 billion, in order to get this deal done? I think Trump, he's the art of the deal president. He knows how to string this along to the point to get them to actually sign off on this deal. And again, I'm looking at the finer points. There's a lot of things that worry me about this deal, including Tehran pledging to never obtain a nuclear weapon. You mean during the entire Trump administration or forever, right? So there's a lot of these things that I would also be very skeptical about. We've seen this movie before. They'll say yes to your face and then, you know, do a complete 180 treaty in the next day or two. And again, please.
Yeah, our US correspondent Ben Leo was talking about the potential for war, in inverted commas, war reparations. This is coming from the Iranian state media, so take it with a bucket load of salt. But $300 billion was the number that was proposed. How would a $300 billion payment made out to the Iranian regime go down with the American public?
Again, if it's being reported on Iranian television or state media, I would just maybe shrug and see what happens. But, you know, there was an economic promise. And again, this is where the Trump administration's great at doing these deals. There will be economic growth if you go along with Trump's plan. And I think that is what may have been promised to them. But it wouldn't be necessarily government to government funding. It would be more that Trump would bring in real estate developers and develop the region, things like that, things that he's promised to other regions that the U.S. have been involved in. So, you know, if that is the line and Trump can deliver, you know, that would be a really good deal, I think, for Iran. But, you know, the ideology sometimes trumps the economic realities, and we've seen this time and time again.
Angie, we are currently looking at live scenes from the White House. That is President Trump at, well, not ringside, octagon side. I can't quite see who he's with, but the fact remains that this is a surreal moment, a peace deal being announced at the same time as the president is attending a mixed martial arts event at the White House. We have heard earlier in the evening that the polling suggests that even amongst Republicans, this event is not a popular one. How do you feel about the optics of the president rushing to announce this memorandum of understanding before this extraordinary act of American theatre plays out at the White House?
Well, it's all about timing for the Trump administration. And one thing that I've noticed covering the Iran conflict is that news always comes out either Sunday night or Monday morning. Why? Here in the U.S., the Sunday oils future comes out around 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we have the Asian markets that I was just monitoring the Asian markets. They're opening up pretty, you know, positively this morning. And then the European markets. So Trump wakes up on a Monday morning with having seen the oils futures, the Asian markets, the European markets, and right before the U.S. markets open, he always announces some sort of promise of a peace deal. So this is why I do take all of this for a grain of salt. And he does this on purpose, of course, to try to manage what news comes out to affect the markets the following week.
Time will tell how this plays out in the weeks and months ahead. Angie Wong, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
I'm delighted to go back to my panel for the final time this morning as we watch live footage of Donald Trump attending the UFC at the White House. I can confirm that he was just interacting with his daughter. I believe it was Ivanka and Don Jr., his son, there before. It's very much a family affair at the White House at the moment. Let's go back to Paul Cox. Paul, we've got about 10 minutes left. We are going to continue talking about this story in the days ahead. But I come back to, and I think it is worth coming back to this question because in many ways it is the fundamental question that needs to be addressed. We've heard Ben Leo, Alex Armstrong, myself, you at various points expressed scepticism. We've heard Bev Turner, I would say Hillary to an extent, express more optimism about where we sit now. How do you feel at 2:46 a.m. On what day is it? Monday morning about this deal and what it means for the Middle East, the US and Iran?
I don't feel any different than I did at around midnight, which was when the large bulk of the information came out. One thing I would say is that
that's why I wonder if
it's of course good to have the prospect of peace in the Middle East. But there's no guarantee of it. Interesting point that Angie Wong just made. I believe in this philosophy of Donald Trump saying things to influence the market. But on this occasion, he's not just saying things to influence the markets, because it's being backed up by leaders around the world, including leaders from Israel, Iran, the US, Europe, etc. So this is something that is momentous and is taking place. I think the question mark, and the biggest question mark over this, is A, what will come of it? And you've already pointed out several times tonight, Will, that since the IRGC have been in position, which was 1979, which I'm afraid to say was the year of my birth and is nearly 50 years ago,
I dare say you're in better shape than the Iranian regime.
Well, some would say. I don't know. Yeah, actually, if we're going to compare me with a man that possibly has limbs missing, then I am in primo shapeo. But we don't know, and I think one thing I have come back to tonight, and I don't want to seem too cute about this, but there are millions of Iranian people who may have thought that they were going to see a regime change, and therefore the peace that's likely to ensue as a result of that regime change, that are very unlikely to get that, and we have to have a thought for them people.
Yep, strength and love to every freedom fighter who has promoted the cause of Iranian freedom in the months and indeed years up until this point. Benjamin, to you, what can we expect in the days ahead, in the lead up to Friday?
Well, I think it's going to be a difficult few days based on what Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, seems to be saying tonight, because just in the hours since we've been on air and this memorandum of understanding was announced, it sounds as though Israel will not agree to stop attacking Hezbollah and Lebanon and their enemies in their southern neighbour. And so, given that this memorandum is between Iran and the US, it can not compel another sovereign nation. And so I think that is going to be the serious question unravelling between now and Friday, when Donald Trump intends to, or JD Vance, I think, in fact, will do the signing from Switzerland at the G7. And so I think this is going to be the big question. The ones after that are, will the prices fall for us, for the oil and gas, and for US citizens? And also, in the next 60 days, negotiations will happen about Iran's nuclear capabilities. Can those be significantly reduced? Because that's not something that Iran has particularly wanted to agree to before.
Well said. Mark, I'll go to you. Same question. What are you anticipating in the days ahead?
Here's what I'm watching. Ben just mentioned who could sign for the U.S., Vice President J.D. Vance, whether in person or electronically, as came out a few hours ago. What I'm watching this week is who's signing for the Iranians.
Yeah.
We've heard from the Supreme National Security Council. We haven't heard from the 56-year-old Supreme Leader. And I'm really curious, are we going to hear from him before Friday? And who is going to sign for the Iranians? That, I think, will tell us a lot of information in the subtext and behind the scenes. That's what I'm going to be watching this week.
Yeah, I think that's a very good shout. I would be very surprised if you saw the Ayatollah there, particularly as he may not be in the best of health, to put it mildly. Hillary, same question to you. Let's look ahead to what we can expect in the days to come.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of European and global leaders actually having to defer to President Trump, because not one of them was able to achieve the sort of peace that President Trump has. And maybe it hasn't, as I said, there's a big difference again about agreeing versus, signing and actually implementing. But we're still in a better place than any other leader was able to achieve. So I think that they should actually be grateful. Even Sir Keir Starmer issued that statement and wrote that he was, supportive of all of this. So all of them, I think you'll see some grovelling actually at the NATO summit, and I think at the G7 meeting. So I think that this is actually a good time for President Trump, and he has a lot to celebrate. May not be finalised, but certainly at least we're on the right track. But I'm with Mark. Who on earth is signing for the Iranians? Is he even alive, that supreme leader?
They're the I guess, geopolitical considerations. On the domestic front, Hillary, how do you anticipate the messaging being received by the American people this week?
Well, I hope, again, to my point that I keep making, I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but I just hope the emphasis can be on the economy. What does this mean to the average American? Because, again, I think peace and prosperity across the world is wonderful in the Middle East, but your average person really doesn't know. And actually, I don't even know that they care. They care about their own pocketbook. They care about the price of gas. So I think the messaging from the White House has to very much be focused on that. And I think Mark has a point to make on that, too.
I was going to follow up real quickly.
Just quickly before you, Mark, just quickly just quickly before you do, because I'm conscious this footage is live. I believe that is UK boxer Tyson Fury, English boxer Tyson Fury. I believe he's wearing a hat that says Donald Trump, our Prime Minister. So that is former world champion Tyson Fury with American President Donald Trump wearing a hat saying Donald Trump, our Prime Minister. Make of that what you will. Go on, Mark.
I mean, isn't there a by-election he could run for coming up here shortly? So, right, yeah, exactly. So all I was going to say is we've seen this from U.S. presidents where in their second term or the final couple of years, they do pivot internationally to foreign affairs.
That's right.
Much to the frustration of the American electorate who want them to be that laser focus, as Hillary said, on domestic issues. We've seen this movie before where they start focusing overseas.
That's right.
Well, and even Keir Starmer, what I think they want is they want these global roles afterwards.
Yeah.
Not the President Trump does, but that's what they all seem to want. Maybe he does too.
Yeah, I wouldn't rule that out. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a historic night. As I said, a surreal night in that we started with a memorandum of understanding, so an agreement to agree between Iran and the United States being announced by the President on Truth Social. You've heard from so many people tonight with a range of views on how optimistic we should be about that potential deal. We will learn more in the days ahead. We will have more for you when the breakfast show comes on at 6 a.m. Of course, that is with the great Alex Armstrong. So many questions still remain, but I think the thing which reveals so much about the world in which we live now is this has all been whilst you've had the President of the United States at a lavish UFC fight on the White House lawn. The Trump era may be closer to the end than the beginning, but it says so much about modern politics. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, to my panel, both in DC and in London. This is an extraordinary time to be doing The Late Show live. You'll have Bev Turner back with you throughout the course of this week. What a joy it has been to be in your living rooms. Thank you very much for joining me on the People's Channel, GB News.
Today, clouds overhead, total zen within. Boxed Solar sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Lots of fine and dry weather around today. Feeling warm where we see any sunny spells, though we are expecting some spots of rain this morning. This mostly across Northern Ireland, northwest Wales, central and southeast England. We have a band of showers moving their way northeastwards, and we may hear the odd rumble of thunder associated with these.